Well, Dennis, we stopped on January the 3rd, 1966, because that is when you went into the military. Now, I don't have a lot of insight or knowledge into those next years of your life. So maybe a prompt here or a prompt there, but other than that, I want you to just start talking from when you went in the military, and let's go until basically you're out of the military and even beyond, with very few prompts.
Okay, well, I can remember going to get a physical, before that time happened, and they rated me P1A, which I thought meant prime beef on the hoof, which meant I wasn't going to get out on medical issues, so I knew I was going in. So the day I go into LA, it's the same place where you probably went for your physical, and I saw one thing that you and I had in common. We saw uh, what's my memory's going to go?
Uncle Bill?
Uncle Gale. Uncle Gale. He was clean. He was doing janitorial work around the building, and Uncle Gale was there the day I went in to be processed. And it was a long, long day. They had processed people alphabetically up to a point, and had filled their allotment for Fort Ord. Not Fort Dix, as Mom thought, but Fort Ord. And she thought maybe they'd shipped all the specialists off. She thought they'd shipped this off someplace else, but fact was the processing that day ended alphabetically. And so the last of us, of the group that was left, I don't know where the alphabet ended, but right up through Wheelers, they had filled their allotment for Fort Ord, so I was to be sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And so I remember was wearing my green leather jacket with my wool collar. I can remember it was cold. I remember getting on a bus and being taken to the airport and flown to Dallas. And there they put us on a military C-47, a 2-engine wheel dragger, airplane, and they flew us DC-3.
I was just going to whisper that.
In DC, in civilian terms, and they flew us into Fort Polk, Louisiana, and it was late afternoon. In fact, it was headed towards sundown. And so they lined us up outside the processing thing. They had a bunch of stakes in the ground, and they just lined us up in the stakes. And it went into night, later, and we were standing in formation outside waiting to be processed. And we're all going, we've forgotten us, and what's happening here? But eventually, in the middle of the night, they took us through an issued us blankets and sheets and whatnot, and took us into a barracks area, and then took a group of us that we never got to lay down, and took us into to prepare the breakfast meal for the next day. And I can remember laying out bacon on these large aluminum trays. You had to lay it out in strips, and then they just did it, stuck it in the oven, and cooked it that way. So that's what I did. I didn't get any sleep, and I got really, I was so tired at that point, and the sergeants and whatnot, the doctors, were so abusive as far as the language they use. It's beyond mentioning in any polite society, the things they called us. But my left eye started twitching, and I couldn't get to stop. It was a nervous tick. And it was several days before it calmed down. I just went on, I guess my eye just went crazy from just distress, But eventually they got us settled in, and then they had these huge cattle trucks. They packed us in the back of these cattle trucks. And big long bed, just packed us all in there, and took us on out to where our permanent barracks were going to be, and offloaded us there. And I wish I could remember. In fact, I probably have my basic training book, which mentions which company and which unit I was in. But there was about 240 of us. And we got moved into our barracks, and I got my first night's sleep in several days. they took several of the guys, and they didn't get their sleep much that night. They put them on fire watch. These buildings were these old wooden buildings that had been built in 1917 to house, you know, the soldiers preparing for World War I. And so they were just tinder dry, and every once in a while these things would burn down, and so they posted a fire watch on both floors, because had there been a fire, those things went up so fast they would have consumed half the guys before they could get out of the building. And so then we went into a basic training routine. They ran us to a mess hall, fed us, stuffed us with lots and lots of carbs, I remember. I had what Dad used to refer to as SOS. You know,
That's on a shingle.
S on the shingle. I remember that. Chipped beef and gravy on toast. I remember lots of milk to drink. They gave us plenty of stuff, but it was really high carb diet. And then came time to begin training. They started with calisthenics, you know, jumping jacks and push-ups. And if they didn't like how you were doing, they'd tell you to jump down and give you 25, and so they'd give you more push-ups and this, that, and the other. So a lot of calisthenics at first, so they worked out this sort of thing. And then they put us through a battery of tests. They actually took us back to some kind of a center, and it was a test. They were looking for officer candidates to see if they could kind of pull the cream off the group, I guess, find out who the smart ones were. Well, I took the test, and I was so bad at math that the math section and algebra and all this stuff, I skipped the whole section. Didn't even do it. But they had a section on tactics and what you would do in this kind of situation, this, that, and the other, which was kind of fun, so I went ahead and went through that and finished that and all the other stuff, but I completely skipped the math. Well, when it came time, 25 of us passed the test. We were eligible for officer, and I was one of them. I hadn't even done the math, but I qualified for officer candidate, and so they took us into the room and gave us the third degree, you know, fortunately I wasn't like an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old draftee. I was 20, you know, going towards 21. I was a little bit older, so I knew what it meant. But, you know, because in those days, they were always short on line officers, first lieutenants, to lead squads, which would be combat stuff. Besides, I had kept in my pocket, I rolled it up and I stuck it in my pocket, was the promise they'd made me that I could go to dental lab school, which I got from the recruiter when I originally went in. So I kept that with me, and the PT continued, you know, and I remember they put us, they started putting us on monkey bars. They had, outside the mess hall, they had these big long row of monkey bars where you had to swing on the monkey bars, and then you could go and eat breakfast every morning. And within the first week, I'd maxed the monkey bars. They were no, of course, you know, I'd walked on my hand when I was a kid. My upper torso was very strong, and so it wasn't long before I had maxed the monkey bars. So I'd go to breakfast, down the line, boop, eat, you know, and it was all done. And then it came into marching drill, you know, and you know how to handle a rifle, you know, quarter arms, you know, right shoulder, then switch left shoulder arms, and all that kind of stuff. And then basic drill marching, you know, where you line up, you know, attention, you know, right face, you know, left face, and then what was the order for turning around, where you had to pivot on one foot. It was kind of a cool little maneuver, but it worked. And then dress right dress, where you'd turn your head to the right, and you put your arm out to the shoulder of the person next to you. That way you could see you and he could see, you know. And that's how you establish the distance between each other in formation with dress right dress, and then parade rest, you know, where you spread your feet apart and put your hands behind your back, all that military stuff. And we worked on that a lot. That was the first thing, just to get us to work together. And we had a real odd assortment, because I was in this particular company with a lot of the guys that were on that plane that came from California, but they mixed us with other groups. We had a group of boys from Mississippi, Southern boys, you know, Southern drawl the whole bit. And some of those guys, they weren't real bright, But then we had a group from Chicago, and these were these street smart, street commando Chicago types, they knew everything, were too smart for their own goods. And but I missed one part that was important. Before they put us on the cattle trucks, they had to strip off all our civilian clothes, and they put us in a basic uniform issue, which they had issued when they'd issued some of the bedding and stuff, as I recall. And they shave off our hairs completely. And I think they did that to kind of strip away all these identities that the people brought with them, was to kind of make us all look the same. And we did, a bunch of young guys with our heads completely shaved, and in these uniforms that some fit better than others, They weren't real careful about that sizing. They did some measurements, but by and large they just kind of threw at you what they had on the counter. So here we are, we've kind of lost our identity. We're out there doing this drill and stuff, and they picked one fellow among us. He had a promise for special training, and he was going to be an officer, become an officer. He was going to be a helicopter pilot. He was going to be a UE pilot. I don't know if he survived the war or not. Nice guy, real nice guy. But they made him. He was my platoon leader, and he handled us well. As he learned, we learned, and whatnot. But the sergeants, the profanity, I don't know where they. I mean, they must have a library where these guys go to study that stuff. I mean, I cannot repeat the things we recall. I just can't repeat them. They're not even in implied company. They shouldn't be repeated. Just terrible things they tell us. References to the venereal diseases we picked up and everything else that they assumed we hadn't, and they'd call us these awful names. Awful stuff. But our main drill sergeant was a black guy. He had been to Vietnam. And he'd line us up, he says, get in formation, or I'm going to zap the whole blank bunch of you. I'm going to zap you. Real tough guy. And then we started doing road marches, they issued a certain amount of field gear, and it was dead of winter, and it was cold, and I don't know what it is about Fort Polk, Louisiana. It was a perfect place to go train somebody for Vietnam. It was full of swamps, and it would have been a ringer for parts of Vietnam in the summertime, but in the wintertime, the wind blew really, really cold and chill through those southern pine trees, and it got into your clothing, it got under your jackets, and here in the West we're used to kind of dry cold, but that wet cold just permeates your clothing. I mean, I had a field jacket on, I had clothes under that, long johns under that, and I was still cold. And we'd stand out there and formation and jump. We'd bounce on our feet and we'd slap our hands together to keep them from freezing. Okay, he let us do that, and we got and do that. And finally we got issued some gloves, and then they marched us on these field exercises way out through the swamps, and they had I remember trucks coming by, and I was kind of wishing I could be in one of those trucks. We were just so cold. And then we got into rifle training. Now, my eyesight wasn't very good. I think I was 20/40 at the time, which is probably feels as much worse. We'll talk about it. But and I knew that I couldn't go. I thought about going to the Air Force at one time, but the only reason I would have gone to the Air Force is I thought it'd be fun to fly a plane. But I knew that you had to be 20 to fly planes, so I had given that dream up long ago. But here they take us out on the rifle range, and with M14s, the Army had not started issuing M16s, which actually I carried an M14 all through Vietnam, which was a better weapon. I was lucky to have it. Better range, much more powerful weapon, but that's another whole story. And so I just tried my best, and I could, one eye the other, and I could kind of hit at the target. But so there was basic marksman, and then there was a category called sharpshooter, and then there was a category, the highest, which was expert. And the pins that they gave you reflected that. One said expert sharpshooter, that and the other. Well, I actually got right at the top of the sharpshooter, and I was shooting blind. And I've always been really proud of what a good shot I was in basic training, considered I couldn't hardly see. It wasn't until I got to Fort Sam Houston that they issued me a pair of glasses and I really could see better. I could see clearly, but I struggled with it and I got really, really good. The day that they practiced with hand grenades, I got put on KP. So I never got to throw a hand grenade in basic, which I always thought would be kind of fun, you know. In fact, we fished with them in Vietnam. I had never, when we started doing that, I had never thrown one before. We would get fish with B-compounded dynamite or hand grenades when we wanted to get extra fish in Vietnam, but I never got to throw one in basic. And so then we started getting into these field maneuvers they called move out. You'd have one guy advance, and then the other call was cover me. The other guys would fire, and we were fired blanks and whatnot in this particular exercise. But they had one kid named Dowdy, and he was his symptoms were clearly Down syndrome. It's Down syndrome, and somehow or another, some recruiting sergeant somewhere, I think up in Chicago or something, had met his quota and had drafted this guy. But you couldn't tell Dowdy what to do, you know. He'd get all excited and then he'd be firing across the other lanes where the other guys were advanced, because we had lanes of guys doing this move out, cover me, move out. And it's you know, infantry tactics, you know, where one person advances while the other ones cover. And then when you then cover and advance, so you pin the enemy down. It's, you know, the kind of stuff that they do. But he made it right to the end of the move out, cover me phase, and they washed him out. But everybody at that point knew it was dangerous. If we ever did stuff with live ammunition with Dowdy, oh my goodness. You know, yeah, boom, 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 all over the place, you know. It was crazy. And I had a friend, I'm remembering things I haven't remembered in a long time, Michael Stephen Nesbitt. He was one of the California guys that came out with me. Real gentle soul. He was studying Buddhism and whatnot. And in the evenings when he had some time, he was reading from the Bhagavad Gita, which is actually kind of a Hindu thing. But he just had real questions about what, you know, killing people and this and the other. And if you ever read the Bhagavad Gita, you know, where Arjuna is standing on his chariot and these two Indian families are getting ready to have a fight because one of the women in the other family got disgraced and all her relatives want revenge, and so the two families line up to fight. And so he's reading this, he's trying to figure out, how can I justify what I'm doing here? He was real philosophical. You could see he was just suffering, you know, to try to understand what it would mean to be a soldier and kill somebody. And so anyway, in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna stands on Arjuna's chariot and says, look at all these people here. These are your, here's these people that you're intermarried with, whose sister's been insulted. You know this guy, you know these are all friends. And look at all your friends on your side. They expect you to be a warrior. If you fail to be a warrior, then not only will they not respect you, but they will begin to question their roles as warriors and defenders of the family, this, that, and the other. So so Krishna tells Arjuna, go ahead and fight, because that's what they expect you to do. If you kill them, they'll be honored to be killed by you because they love you, Arjuna, and your own relatives will expect you to do that. So basically, bite the bullet and do it. And that's what Krishna tells Arjuna. And I, at that time, I said to him, well, I don't know what you're going to end up doing in the army, but I can remember in the Book of Mormon where the people were justified in defending their own lands and their own people. You know, and there comes a time when you may be put in that role, and if it's a righteous situation, you're justified in doing that. So that's about as much as I could tell him. But in the meantime, I knew going to Vietnam didn't quite equate with that that model of reality, you know. But I got through it okay. Our sergeant, he wanted to really toughen us up for Vietnam, so he took us to Tigerland. Now at Fort Polk, Louisiana, they had what was called Tigerland, and it was for the advanced infantry training. where they would actually, you know, they had these signs up all around, Bong the Kong, you know, and all this sort of stuff, you know, and to get the guys, you know, to hating the Viet Cong. But there was this one platform that was like 15 feet off the air, off the ground, and you had to jump off this platform, just jump. And then you'd swing on these things through the trees, and I did okay till I got to that platform, and I jumped off the platform and I landed wrong, and I really wrenched my back. I was flat on the ground, flat on the ground. So they put me in an ambulance and they evacuated me, and it calmed down, and after a few hours, you're doing okay now, soldier, get back to your unit. They ended up sending me back to my unit, and I went on with it, so I didn't lose any training. The thing that scared me the most, and that promise that they made for that training that I would get in the future, for that if you missed any segment of basic training, it got rotated back, that the promise, it annulled the promise, because in giving you that promise for the school, they had given you an exact start date.
They should have allowed for injury.
Well,
They didn't want to.
this is not, you don't know the Army.
No, I do, exactly I do.
But I actually got through basic training. By the time I got done, I was, even though I knew I was headed for medical training, I was as close as I'd probably ever get in my life to being a mean, clean fighting machine, which is what they wanted to make out of it. You know? So I actually got through basic training and stood the formation. We did a parade, you know, in front of the officers and in formation to show how our newfound prowess and whatnot. So home I go for leave, and I spent time at home with my girlfriend, my family, mostly my girlfriend, because Carolyn Dieter and I had been dating at that time for quite a while, and so we were already pretty close, you know. So off to Texas.
Fort Sam Houston.
Fort Sam Houston, right in the middle of San Antonio, Texas, and I remember they had 0 week because I was now joining the medical corps, for which the dental lab and all that stuff was part of. They also trained Army waxing. They had barracks full of wax across from us, but we were in barracks with all the people that were being trained medics. But when they first got us, they took all of us, regardless of the training we were going to receive, and they put us through 0 week, in which we went down. It was this big field, and we learned what it was like to be a medic, you know, splints, sucking chest wounds, all the stuff that you would encounter as a combat medic. And they trained us to load. They had a UE helicopter there. They trained us to load onto the helicopter, this, that, and the other. Well, when the 0 week was over, then I went into my medical specialty school, which was like a whole different tier up. And the other medical people down went in to become medics, you know, with the bench and be unloading and moving helicopters as a regular assignment, with the dust off in Vietnam. So I got into the school, and they handed us a cylinder of chalk about this long and about maybe an inch around, and they wanted us to, on one end, to carve it off perfectly round and even, and the other end they wanted us to carve a triangle out of the end of it. And the gal commented, she said, sorry to lose that. She commented when she looked at my chalk that, gee, she said, you did a really beautiful job on that. So I had good hands. I showed that I could do that kind of thing. And in fact, there was one guy in the unit, Pelletier, his father had been a dental lab tech. And Hadley, not Hadley, but Pond, I think Pond, so maybe we had two of them. Their parents had been dental people, so they'd grown up working with that kind of stuff, and I carved a better piece of chalk than So we went into training. We learned, first of all, to do wax-ups, you know, these models for placing teeth and whatnot. And then we learned, just a whole series of things. Eventually we learned how to make crown and bridge, chrome cobalt frames, mouthpieces for, you know, you name it, gold crowns, inlays, full dentures. In fact, for years I carried around a denture I made in school, and I think I eventually lost it, but it may have gone in the truck fire. But I did very, very well. But they had given us, for our squad leader, a guy named Rawls. Now, Rawls had been in the Army, had gone out and had come back in. And so they made him the class leader. It was shorter than all of us, kind of mouthy, and he was trying to be a tough guy. And everybody hated him. Well, I just kind of tolerated him, for one of those. But a couple of the guys decided they'd had enough of brawls, and they gave him a blanket party. I don't know if you know what that is.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, well, in the night you come up on the guy in his bed, you throw a blanket over him, and you beat him to a pulp, and that's what they did to him. And so they called us all out in formation, trying to find out who did it, and nobody would cop to it. And so they kind of put us on. I don't know. We got a little extra duty that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise because that happened. But what happened was they looked around to see who to replace him, and I was numerically I was the oldest, so they gave it to me. I think that's why they decided to give it to me. So they made me the squad leader. And I'm thinking, oh no, now when do I get my blanket party? Everybody will hate my guts in a month. But I knew not what to do. I knew the things he'd done were really jerky, stupid things. So I didn't treat the guys that way, and they became really loyal to me. You know, when we'd march, you call your cadence, one more week and I'll be through, sound off, 1, 2. Drinking beer with lots of brew and all these different things that the units would call when they were marching. Some of the black units, the medical units, it really tickled me. They'd be marching. Can't get enough of that sugar crisp. They'd come up with these really catchy things, And it was fun to watch them because they were so rhythmical and so precise, I don't know what that is, but just
They've got it, don't they?
They got it. They got it. And so, but we'd use some of the marches, but what I would do is I just took my fingers, and the guys would all do, we just march in formation with our fingers. Okay, where we went. And nobody would mess with it. We were doing real good. And finally, one of the other squads that was training, they were right behind us in the cycle. They were a week apart in the cycles going through all the different things. He made disparaging remarks about our group while we were in formation, all there together, which reflected upon me. So after the formation, he was upstairs in a barracks next to us. So I went upstairs, and he was by his bunk. And he turned around, and I creamed him. I smacked him right into his foot locker. He goes, falls on the bed. He's gone. I knocked him out, as I recall. And so everybody's going, oh man, we're in big trouble now. There's Article 15 of court-martial, Nothing ever came of it. And boy, did we never got mouthed again by anybody. We were the Strack formation. And so the guys respected me a lot. And we got through the training and learned all the things they wanted to do. And their time came to get assignments, and I even have a list, and I found it last night going through that stuff, the paperwork of where each one of them got sent to. Some got sent to Germany, some got sent to Korea. My favorite friend, Henley, he was from, not Henley, I can't think of his name, but he was from Virginia, and his daddy had been a ball player. And played in some minor league back then, and we were the closest friends. But he got sent to Korea, and Pond got sent back to Massachusetts. Some of the guys I can remember, but Henley and Henley was the only one who was married and had a family. They could have sent a single guy, but they sent Henley and me to Vietnam. He had to leave the family behind to go to Vietnam for a year. I'll never understand logic, but that's what they did.
They didn't think of people.
Well, yeah, we used to laugh about it, call it the Army's new concept now, manpower,
Well, if you looked at the whole way they treated you, leaving out there half the night, not letting you get sleep, putting you in cattle truck, that's all a dehumanizing.
Oh, it's deliberate.
Of course it was.
Absolutely deliberate. They were trying
stripping away your pride, you're stripping
personality,
away
your identity,
your self-esteem,
yeah,
everything.
Yeah, well, that was the whole idea of it. And so I got my orders, and I came home. And off to Vietnam I go. Well, so I found this among the stuff. I had done a synopsis Okay, so I got my orders. I was to depart for Vietnam, report to Oakland Army Base, which isn't any there anymore. It was called the Pink Palace in those days because it was a bunch of brick buildings that had been part of the Army's assigning people overseas in the Pacific since the Second World War, Korean War, and I probably showed you that picture of these huge buildings full of bunk beds. You know, hundreds of guys put into these things. It was like gymnasiums, huge gymnasiums filled with bunk beds and hundreds of guys all waiting for their turn to get on a plane and fly to Vietnam. So I'm to report to Vietnam, Oakland Army Base, the 12th of August, 1966. I even have the address, South 146. I was actually arrived at Cam Bay. It's the Air Force Base. It wasn't the actual bay, it was an inland. It was the Air Force Base at Cam Bay. Is that? No, that's not right. That's where we landed. They landed us first because half of our guys were in khakis and half of us were in greens, in regular combat greens. And they landed. It was a really short stop, but they landed us at Pleiku. Took all the guys who had been dressed in green. They were all headed to the 101st Airborne. They were going right to a combat unit. And the rest of us were going to go down to Saigon and be processed into whatever our specialties was. And I had a friend that I kind of made there in Oakland, this and the other, and he was from Huntington Beach, and I remember his name was Woody, and he was on his way to the 101st Airborne. That's what he's going to do. And so we set at the side of the runway, and I remember the runway was patrolled by Marine Corps. They had Marine Corps in Jeeps. They weren't Jeeps, they were called Mutts, M141s, they looked kind of like Jeeps. And they had big 50 caliber machine gun up on the top of the Jeeps, and they kept a perimeter of this airfield. We were right at the perimeter of the barbed wire, waiting as a group on into the evening, and they came up with, I think they gave us boxed sea rations or something, just something to eat because we were hungry. And we just waited there, and I remember taking a couple photographs before the sun went down, and a couple pictures of airplanes that are in that book of mine. And eventually they put us on an airplane, and they flew us down to Saigon. Now when we got to Saigon, they put us in these buses, and they bused us to Saigon. These buses had wire mesh on all the windows, so somebody couldn't throw a grenade or a bomb into the bus to blow up the bus, like that. They bussed us through Saigon, and I'm looking out through Saigon, and there's traffic and pedicabs, and rickshaw kind of things, all sorts of things going on, and I remember looking at what was obviously a barber shop, and it said Hokta, H-O-C-T-O-C, was a haircut, Hokta. And so I was kind of trying to get used to my environment, and when they bussed us, I remember when they bussed us out of the field there at it was called Tan Son Nhut. It was the airfield Tan Son Nhut outside of Saigon. Right by the side of the road, there was two German Junker 52 3-engine airplanes with the wings pulled off and raised up on pedestals. And they were training the South Vietnamese airborne to jump out of airplanes by having them jump out of these German Junker 52s. Well, I found out later that when the Germans lost the war, the French took all that captured material and shipped it into China to recapture Indochina. I saw Volkswagen Kubelwagens. I saw the Junker 52. I saw a number of captured German equipment that had been in use with the French in Indochina. But that was the first thing because I knew what a Junker 52 looked like. There it was, two of them with the wings all propped up for training right there at Tan Son Nhut. So in we go to it. Was the name of the place was Camp Alpha. That's what it was called, Camp Alpha. Up to that point, the war had not gotten really big in Vietnam, and so everybody that went over was what they called it wasn't regular Army, it was all the advisors and all these people that they had been sending to Vietnam for years. And so this was the camp that was set up in Saigon to process all the military advisors and all that kind of stuff. So I actually processed through Camp Alpha, and I did a double take because when we got to the gate of Camp Alpha, I had read a magazine article on Vietnam about 6 months before, and it was a picture of the gate at Camp Alpha. And suddenly I'm walking through the gate at Camp Alpha, and I'm going, whoa. But I remember going in there, and they just held us for days. It was right at the edge of the Saigon golf course, and you could look over the fence, and you could see the Vietnamese, the elite Vietnamese that had the money to do that. They were wearing these old golfing things, you know, with the knee socks and, and the little hat, you know. They would dress up like a Scotsman, and they were out there knocking golf balls around. I thought that was really funny.
Argyle socks.
Yeah, oh yeah. Little short little Vietnamese dressed up like Argyle golfers, I guess. And so I'm in one tent, and for the people being processed, the next tent over was full of Australian soldiers, regular Army Australians, before they really drafted. They started drafting the Australian Army, I guess, later. But these were old timers. These were old. Oh, what a tough bunch of guys. You know, as soon as the duty stuff, because they had us doing things during the week, but when the weekend came, they'd start drinking on Friday night, drink all night, drink through the day on Saturday, drink through the night on Sunday, Monday morning, big formation. And a couple.
What that happened 50 years later, I wonder how they survived.
Well, I mean, these Aussies, and it swore and loud and raucous, and you could hear them scrapping all the time. A couple of the Americans went over on the first Saturday I was going to join them, and they lasted till about midday on Sunday, and they staggered back to our bunk. And so the Australians, they just kept partying. And then a golf ball flies over the fence, bonk, and goes into the Australian tent. And out comes this Australian raging man. He looks over the fence, sees the little Vietnamese, he jumps the fence and chases this little Vietnamese guy all around the golf course. The little Vietnamese guy just goes, but he's just running as fast as he can, you know. And he didn't actually catch him, but he scared the wits out of him. You know, I think he just went out there to scare him real good. But then in the center of the camp, they had these sheds that they built. We were in the tents, kind of on the perimeter of Camp Alpha. And these were sheds, and these were the guys who were the military advisors that were rotating home. They'd finished their time. And they didn't do anything. They'd lie in their bunks, bunk beds, and like they were dead almost. They'd just lie in their bunks. It was hot, you know, sweat poured off of it. I can remember seeing the sweat pouring off of them, and they'd get it for chow. They'd go back in their bunks and they'd lay down. A lot of them, you know that movie, We Were Soldiers Once? Did you ever see that thing, Mel Gibson? A lot of these guys that was the first major combat between the North Vietnamese and the Americans. A lot of these guys were survivors of that episode. And they were just glad to be alive, glad to know that they were basically headed home, but they were just lifeless, just a group of lifeless men. I'm going, you know, what's going on here? Is that going to be me in a year? Am I going to be like that?
You'd think that.
Yeah, you'd wonder what was going on. But then they called us out in formation, and I've got a copy of the orders for at least the first group. They ended up sending 2,000 of us, regardless of what we've been trained to do, to Cam Ranh Bay. And they ended up flying us back out of what had happened is the U.S., this was the point in the war, he had advisors, suddenly Johnson orders the troops over, and then all of a sudden, huge rise in the amount of people. I probably arrived just at the beginning of the curve up, when all of a sudden masses of American troops were going into Vietnam. And so they had, excuse me, I'm sorry, camera. They had ordered tons of military equipment to be delivered by boat to Cam Ranh Bay, and they had not trained the stevedores to unload it. They had not had enough trained stevedores come in from the States, so they were massively short-handed. And they were afraid because when I got there were dozens of ships at anchor out there. And the Cam Ranh Bay facility was a beach, There was a kind of a wooden pile thing built up with a 50-ton dock crane. A tent city of engineers, 119th Transportation, that had been sent there that could help with stevedores, the ones that were trained, but not near enough to cover the amount of work they had to do. And then if you went down along the beach, there was an old abandoned French barracks. Nice, it was well built, French barracks. And at the very end of that peninsula was a little Vietnamese village, a little fishing village that had been there since who knows when. But they put us up with 119th Transportation. They put us in this tent city. Didn't even have no buildings around, no PXs, nothing. If we needed shaving cream, they had one tent set up, at what we call a GP medium tent. You could go in one end and you could buy, if you were a smoker, cigarettes. You could buy 3.2 beer. They wouldn't give the GIs anything higher alcohol. It was always 3.2. You could get shaving gear. You get this, that, and the other, and then you paid it for it when you entered or exited the other end of the tent. And that was our PX. But we worked 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 7 days a week. Every 2 weeks, they'd give us half a day off so we could do our laundry and catch up on our lives, write letters, that kind of stuff. But that's what I did for 2 months. These ships, they were every flag. We saw Japanese flags, we saw Korean flags, British flags. The British ships were full of 500-pound bombs that had British ordnance markers stamped on them, but they were American-made bombs. They'd been given to the British at the end of World War II surplus, and now the British had sold them back to the American government at full value, and had shipped them to Vietnam. Typical stuff. But
Typical the Americans putting up with that crap.
oh, we always did. We always did.
Still do.
And what I spent a lot of my time unloading was napalm. There were these crates with these big long cylinders in them, but then there was these big conical tips, which were kind of folded into each other and included in the package, so it wasn't quite as big a package. But for a while I worked on that 50-ton dock crane, and we unloaded what they called mike boats and duck W's, amphibious ducks they called it. It had a lot of those, and they had a more modern version that the Navy had. It was like a duck, but it's much bigger. But a lot of what I unloaded was duck W's and mike boats. And we'd unload napalm. And I can remember unloading crates of tropical Hershey's chocolate. You know, it was made thick enough to where it wouldn't melt in the tropical heat. But then the napalm, the seams would leak, and it was clear liquid, but it looked like gel model airplane glue, like when you're a kid, that kind of little nodules. And we peeled it off, and that's how we heat our sea rations. You open your little cans of sea ration, you could hold it over the napalm things and light it, and you could heat your food. And so I did the day shift for a long time, and then they put me on night shift. And it was really dangerous because the guys that they assigned to go out on the mike boats, the guys that actually went out to the ships are in the harbor and they're doing this, and the mike boats are kind of doing this down beside, and then all of a sudden, boom, they bang together and that kind of stuff. And a lot of these guys had never done anything like it. And right off we had, half a dozen guys got killed because they'd lose their balance and get between the mike boats and the ships, and that was the end of them, you know. And one of the guys described to me, he was out there, he said we were unloading a Jeep off one of the big ships and the cables broke and it missed the mike boat. He said, but it just went right down to the bottom of the harbor. He said, I looked over the side of the boat, and it was like because it was square power, he said it was like a elevator shaft, went right down to the bottom. You could look down there as the thing went down until the water kind of collapsed over the thing. But it was, and then we went to loading trick track. I call it trick track. It was this perforated metal stuff that the Air Force used to put on runways, to prefabricate runways. It would link piece into piece into piece, and you could lay a runway with it. And that was heavy, it was dangerous to carry, and another guy got killed. I remember I jumped up on the truck to help him, but he was so far gone. The load shifted off the truck, it came over the truck, because they were rushing everything. The Army isn't careful. And so they'd load this stuff up on the deuce-and-a-half trucks. They wouldn't tie it down. And coming down the grade from where we were loading, the truck in front of him braked, and he wasn't paying quite attention. He braked too late, the load shifted, and when it flattened, it said like it was like a basketball flattened. And when I got there, there's nothing I could do. I mean, his body was just twitching. It was death twitching. When people kill like that suddenly, that twitch, you see. And so I just, it wasn't, the stuff was too heavy. It was on top. I couldn't do a thing. But eventually they got a chaplain out there, and he did last rites and this, that, and the other. But that was the kind of environment that we were in. Life was cheap. We worked long hours. So I got on the night shift, and I'm back on napalm, and it had kind of bands on the napalm drums that they were out of the crates, and they were now loading them on the trucks. And you put them on the truck, and if you staggered the bands, you could get one more napalm on the truck. These are big flatbed trucks, so they live in the napalm one. But so that night I'm put on for the first thing, and the first time I've seen this particular system. So I'm loading the napalm band to band, not knowing that there's this trick where you stagger them. You gain about 3 inches on each one, and you get an extra one on there. And so the sergeant comes up there, and he's, "What are you doing here?" You know how sergeants are. You unload that truck and do it again. You know, Army stuff. Your brother Dennis used the F word. I said, "Blank you, you know, I'm going to unload this truck." And so he's a big, strapping Southern guy. And he starts to jump up in the truck. He's going to pull me off the truck and beat me up. So I knew I didn't have a chance. I knew he was going to take me apart, so I kicked him in the face. What you going to do? You know he's going to come up and hurt you. And so that stunned him, and I got on the ground, and the fight was going okay, except he was gaining on me. And I said, "This is a fight I'm going to lose." And so by that time, the other guys pulled us apart and said, "Dennis is in trouble again." Oh no, they're going to Article 15 or court martial. We're going to do something because I just kicked a sergeant in the face, But I think we can. So I finished. The guys in our tent, there was on this side of me was John West. He was a trained radio man, infantry radio man, and he wanted to be in Vietnam so bad. He was in Korea, and he volunteered for Vietnam, so he was there, and he was hoping to go into a combat unit, but all of us were stevedores, And the other side was Grisolfi, who was a kid from New York. I showed you the pictures. Grisolfi, so we got to be buddies. We kind of hung around for a while. But the time came to go, and so they loaded us up and put us on planes and shipped us back to Saigon. And I don't know where they went, except that John West's name shows up on the wall, all his information. He was killed in March of '67, so he lasted from October to March before he was killed. That was the radio man. He was killed. Grisolfi was a tank mechanic. He probably, but when we got to Saigon, same thing. Put us on the buses with the wire windows, and they took us. They didn't take us back to Camp Alpha. They took us to Long Binh. They had opened up this whole huge center to all the massive replacements that were coming into Vietnam at that time. And so I got to go to Long Binh and process into Vietnam again. I'd been there 2 months, but I processed in again like I'd never arrived. And so apparently where they intended to send me originally, the dental thing, had probably been filled by somebody else. They didn't really have a place to send me. So they knew that the closest unit was the Cu Chi, which was in the Parrotwood Peak over in the Iron Triangle. They knew they had a dental unit over there, so they sent me over there. They had dentists. They had chairside assistants to assist the dentist. And they actually had Pabon. They had one old-timer who had worked his dental lab, but all he was doing was making mouthpieces like they do for football players, because so many of the tank drivers were getting their teeth knocked out. Tanks, when you stop a track abruptly, you don't roll further, it just goes boom, like this, and the guys are knocking their teeth out on the hatches and the rim. And so they had a lot of guys coming into the dental unit who had their front teeth knocked out from the armor units. And so Pabon was doing that, but there was nothing else for me to do. Dental lab, they weren't set up to make teeth, crowns, la-di-da, really. I think originally I was probably meant to go to Saigon to some general's dental lab and that kind of stuff. I don't know to this day what I was meant to do, but they didn't really have anything for me to do. So they put me on what they call convoy duty. There's always needs for supplies. There's supplies to come from Saigon. There were supplies to go out to Tay Ninh, supplies to go out to Bao Tieng, and all this medical stuff getting shipped. And that's what I did. And that one picture of me where I've got the goggles and that face mask hanging. So I'm on the roads, and by then the weather's pretty dusty. You know, that red dust that would just get in your pores and your clothes, and so you wore. So I got a surgical mask from the medical people, and I wore that to keep the dust out of my lungs, and the goggles so I could see it. And I sat in Deuce and a Half with my M14 across my lap, and I guarded convoys all the way into Saigon, all the way out, all Tay Ninh, all the way back and forth, back and forth. And that's where I got to know Win. He was the interrogator and translator. Because the helicopter pad and the clearance station was right. They were on the main road. We were just right behind them in the dental unit.
He's one of the ones with the tunnels. Win is one of the ones.
Yeah, so Win, and through Win I got to know Gartland. But
What's the other guy with tunnels?
yeah, Gartland he was a New Yorker. Short guy, but he was infantry. He had his combat infantry badge on him. But I got to know him pretty well, and because I knew Win, and through Win I got to know Gartland. Is this getting too long and drawn out?
No. Are you kidding? I'm hoping that I can keep you doing this until 4 o'clock when they get back.
Well, I saw him yawning. I thought, oh no, I bored him to tears.
No.
It's all over.
No.
No.
I'm hoping I can keep you going and literally until he comes back at 4, and I have to keep my promise to show him the baseball game.
Okay. So I went with Win into Saigon one time, and we had time to report in for the load, but you know, the stuff wasn't ready to go. So he took me into Saigon, right into Saigon. He took me to his family's house. I remember we went through this neighborhood, and I remember this Buddhist temple with these 2 big horse statues in front of it. To this day, I think I could almost find that place if it didn't get destroyed, but this cute little temple with these big horse statues in front of it. And a couple blocks over was his house. I met his mother. There, on the wall in their front room, there was a picture of his father, edged in black, and his father had been a Vietnamese colonel and had been killed several years earlier. Win had been an English teacher, and that's why he got sucked into the South Vietnamese Army to liaison with the Americans, because he could speak the language. Very bright man, good man. And I always thought I'd like to find him. Maybe he ended up in Orange County. Maybe he got out of Vietnam. I don't know. But I always wished he would have. The trouble is that half the men in Vietnam are called Win. It's the most common first name in
N-G-U-Y-E.
Yeah.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
I knew when you were saying when it was N-G-U-Y.
Yeah.
We have kids in the schools.
I had several
where we
students
taught,
named Win.
Yeah.
So I know exactly, when you said Win, I knew it was that.
Well, then he took me to the Saigon Zoo. I remember seeing the elephant. We went to the Saigon Zoo, but it was almost lunchtime, and so he took me. He had cousins or whatnot that worked for the Vietnamese government in Saigon, and they had white shirts on. And that whole family. Oh, and in the home where the picture of the father edged in black, next to it was a picture of the Pope. So they were Catholic. In Vietnam, I don't know historically all the ins and outs, but there was the Christians who worked for the French and had become part of the kind of the bureaucracy and the aristocracy of South Vietnam. There was the Buddhists, a lot of them, there were a lot of Buddhist monks and also some of them involved in the government. There was the Cao Dai, who were a kind of an independent religious group that was a combination of Christianity and Buddhism and everything all thrown into one. And then there was a Hoa, I can't remember this, but there was like 4 major religious denominations kind of involved. But his people were Catholic and they were working for the government. And so we met him for lunch in this 7 Beef restaurant, where they brought out a plate loaded with rice. I call them tortillas, but it was rice, flat, as thin as a tortilla. And often they had kind of a weaving pattern on them because they were dried on these big bamboo mats, and the pattern of the weaving came off on these things. And we had this seven beef dinner with them, had lunch. It was really good, very, very good. In fact, I mentioned to Phil, the son of that person who owned that restaurant opened a restaurant down here in Milpitas, and I talked to him about it, and he talked a little bit about his family and whatnot, but that's a much later story. And then back we got our supplies and we convoyed back in. When the convoys went out, because they were being ambushed so often, they would have in the morning the police would go out, the MPs, with their jeeps, and the jeeps, they put armor plate up on the sides of the jeep to surround it so they were not so vulnerable, and then they would mount a big 50 caliber machine gun on the top of it. So the jeeps went out first, and then the tanks went out. They would send out M48 tanks. They didn't use anything but M48s. The M60s were all in Europe, so they used the second line of tanks in Vietnam. All the M48 tanks went out, and they would go off to the side of the road at intervals, maybe a mile apart, and they would just stand in defensive positions. And then MPCs, the personnel carriers, those boxy things that I never could understand how they could stop. They ran out of room in those things, you know. Hardly stop a bullet. In fact, I remember a casualty incident with those. It was pretty horrifying. But then they'd lay out at different positions, and then the convoys would come through. Then the tanks would go back to but we're talking miles and miles to Saigon, you know. And I remember that first convoy which was before Win, actually, before I went into Saigon was Win, but every bridge was blown. There wasn't a single bridge that wasn't blown. We went on pontoon bridges every time we crossed the river. And I remember there was a Nestle's factory that the French had out there at some point in time, which was rusting and abandoned because it was in a part which was now dangerous. And what I remember most of all is miles and miles and miles of Michelin rubber plantations, especially if you went the convoy the other way towards Tay Ninh. And that little Michelin figure looks like a little balloon figure.
Yeah, right.
You'd see the sign with the Michelin thing right up on the top of the things, but just endless miles of rubber plantations as you went up through the Parrot Peak to Tay Ninh. But anyway, kind of back to the story. So we went back into Cu Chi. We made it back. It wasn't long after that, because the Gartman and Win came to me and told me that little story. You know, hey Wheeler, hey Garland, you know, Win. He said, you're not going to believe this. He says, but they're finding tunnels all underneath our base. I said, really? He says, yeah. I guess they found the first one in the motor pool, and they went down there exploring and realized this entire base was built on honeycomb tunnels. The entire base is smack on top of it. Turns out the French had built those tunnels during the Viet Minh, the people that fought the French, and it was a headquarters area outside of Saigon in the Parrot Peak, which is close to the Cambodian border and close to Saigon, and so the army in its ignorance put their base camp smack on top of this incredible, vast, huge. I mean, tourists don't go through a few little tunnels, but it was huge. And he said, yeah, he says they got a room down there that's full of sewing machines as big as a GP medium tent. They're making their own uniforms. And at first I said, oh yeah, right. You know, I thought Garland, you know, New York, he was going to give me the room there. He says, no, I'm not kidding. There's another room. They got a stage. They entertain themselves. He says it goes 3 floors down, 3 stories down, way down deep in the earth. He says they're everywhere down there. Well, so that starts the phase where they're trying to deal with these tunnels, and blowing up. You know, boom! You could hear it in the perimeters all the way around, and to defoliate the area so they could see where all this stuff was, because you got jungle growing all around it. This, that, and the other. They sprayed Agent Orange. They flew it in off of aircraft carriers, I think, and they just sprayed everything with Agent Orange. Everything around was just saturated with Agent Orange, and it was so bad one day. I said to a friend of mine, enough of this, I went and got my service gas mask, and I put it on. And I wore it for the rest of the day that day while it was so bad. All the rest of the guys, most of those guys, because the guys that were exposed to it, most of those guys came down with a series of diseases that did terrible things to the Vietnamese population. Children born without eyes and stuff like that, just terrible, terrible things. But for most Vietnam vets, it gave them, what is that, you know, when your blood sugar goes crazy, diabetes. It triggered diabetes. And so many, that's why so many of the Vietnamese soldiers, because the two most heavily exposed areas of Vietnam to that stuff was the Iron Triangle and the DMZ up on the border with North Vietnam, where they kept it clear so they could watch for infiltrators. So I was in one of the most heavily saturated areas of Vietnam for Agent Orange. And I really don't know what effects I've had. They combine all the mercury I had when I was a kid and the radium up my nostrils and the Agent Orange. I really wonder, you know, I think I've been kind of preserved. I don't know, I'm still around. But, so that went on, and then the trouble was they'd blow these things up, and the Viet Cong would dig them out and use them again. And so they thought they dealt with the problem, and they found out they were back down there again. And they popped up in the motor pool, and they blow up a bunch of stuff. Eventually, after I left there, they satchel charged the whole row of helicopters at Cu Chi, blew up a whole bunch of them. But what they started doing was internal guard duty, which meant because now you couldn't trust them to not pop up right inside your perimeter, you had to walk interior guard duty. You had the people in the perimeter, in the bunkers, but then you walk, and I did that. I remember one night an explosion went off in the interior of it, saw a flash of light and it blinded me, I couldn't see, so I just dropped down on the ground until I could get my vision back, because I didn't want to be standing in the blinds and have somebody shoot me. I just dropped down on the ground and lay there until I could see enough to move on. But so I pulled internal. Crazy stuff, crazy stuff. But the first night I got to Cu Chi, let me read you a letter, a part of the letter. What did I do with it?
Something fell off on the side.
So-
One of these, I'll bet.
You know, here it is right here. This is a letter I wrote to Aunt Lizzie. Is this too much?
No, are you kidding?
He'll take any detail he can get.
If I can keep you going until 4 o'clock, I'll keep doing it, and I'll beg you to do some more when we get back after the game.
Dear Aunt Lizzie, wanted to thank you for the card and package was yummy, surprisingly fresh. Things are as well as can be expected. It rains at least once a day and never less than 24 hours at a time. Have gotten a little cold from guard duty the other night. That was when I was walking internal guard duty. Which coupled with sinus troubles makes for a pretty miserable GI. The night I arrived here, the place got its first mortar attack since July. Don't say anything to Mom about it because I didn't mention it to her and didn't want her to worry. I guess they thought somebody important was in the area. I found I could wince and cry with the best of them, sort of a picked-on feeling. Other than that, it has been very quiet, well, as far as the VC are concerned. But however, there's these big 175mm guns not far from us that keep firing 20 miles into the Cong territory. I think that's the territory. Tong roads along the Cambodian border. Whenever they were use a full charge, the ground shakes and I jumped several feet. Boom! One just went off. At night you can see trip flares going off all around the perimeter. They had trip flares in the barbed wire, so if the Viet Cong got in, they did trip flare. Would send up a flare, and then the guys in the perimeter could shoot up trip flares to see when people were trying to infiltrate. Anyway, that was the part I wanted to read. So, yeah, my first night at Cu Chi, I get mortared, and I had no memory of that until I settled Aunt Lizzie's estate and found this letter. I had suppressed it, completely suppressed it, and it took me a while to put that together. And then I remembered coming out of a bunker and seeing scattered around the tail fins of mortar rounds. When they explode, you have the main body with the shrapnel that goes out, but the little fragile fins just fly off in various directions. So I have a memory of seeing fins on the ground, and that's the only reason I can tell you that story, because of what I told Aunt Lizzie, which is how it was. So then they decided, other ways they wanted to keep me busy. I did several more convoys. One time I went as a guard for the Colonel. I call him Colonel Water Tank. I found a picture of him just last night looking through my stuff. He was a colonel. He was in command of that dental unit, but he had to go to Tay Ninh, which is what went through the Hobo and the Bolo woods, and it was dangerous because the Viet Cong would go up in the trees and they'd tie themselves into the tree and they'd snipe at the targets that would come through, and so I guess he wanted a guard. So I sat in the back of the mutt, the Jeep. I think it was a brewer that was driving, maybe brewers from Lake Kulak. My memory slips a little bit here, but anyway, right in the middle of this thing, the convoys had all gone through. We were at the tail end of the convoy, and suddenly the Jeep breaks down. It just breaks down, stops in the middle of the road, and so the colonel gets out of the mutt with his driver, goes, sits in the ditch. There's a deep ditch right there by the side of the road, and orders me to go stand in the middle of the road with my rifle at port arms. He figures if there's anybody tied in the trees or whatnot, they'll get me, and he'll know these. So I was the canary in the mine, more or less. And so I'm sitting there in the middle of the road, and I'm saying, goodbye, Mom, goodbye, Dad, goodbye, Carolyn, goodbye, Phil, goodbye. I was just saying goodbye to all my family, just one by one, going through the thing there. And I looked down the road, and there was the next blown-out bridge, and there was a South Vietnamese unit who was guarding the bridge. And when they saw him put me in the middle of the road, they pulled in their weapons, went down into their bunker, so they wouldn't get caught in what was going on. So I thought I was dead. I thought it was all over. But here comes the last military Jeep with his armor plate bringing up the rear, and he sees he's got a colonel there, and so he ties a chain to us and he hauls us all back to Cu Chi. We didn't make it to Tay Ninh or wherever we were headed that day, but I was pretty unhappy with him. I know the Army philosophy, that you sacrifice the privates, and I guess if you have to, you sacrifice the sergeant, but its rank has its privilege. I was the lowest rank at that point. I was still a PFC. I hadn't made Spec 4, so I had a grudge against this guy. I didn't like him. So the next assignment they gave me, they were getting a lot of activity in the barbed wire and a lot of units out there, and occasionally GIs, occasionally captured Viet Cong, captured North. I can remember wounded North Vietnamese soldiers coming in, and they loaded them off the helicopter pad, and of course they had their hands tied behind their back and a blindfold, so they couldn't see anything. And so you'd step off the helicopter, and there was this rubber pad underneath the helicopter. I remember the first prisoner stepped on that rubber pad and kind of jumped back like, what did I just step on? I'm just empathetic, oh man, And the problem was that there was a couple of lifer medics in that unit that they wanted to be rough and tough and bad. They had two Vietnamese Viet Cong prisoners come in, walking, perfectly alive. They left there dead. They killed them. They killed them. Normally what would happen, they would turn them over to the South Vietnamese, who took them to Saigon, and they put them in these cages and kept them. And if they could get them to reform, they called them Chu Hois, which meant that they would open arms, which meant that they would, I think that's what Chu Hoi meant, that they would defect to the South Vietnamese and work for the South Vietnamese. Otherwise, they went into these awful, dismal prisons where they kept all those North Vietnamese. But these two never had a chance. They never got out of that medical facility, Well, the next assignment they gave me was headquarters to the medical facility. Okay, they're short of medics, but I'm not trained as a medic. Well, that's where you're going. So they sent me over there, and I remember one night that was sticking in my mind to the day I died. They came up and came in where they had me in a hooch right beside the medical thing, woke me up, and I'm trying to get dressed, and it was dark, pitch black, and no electric lighting, and night was fine. And I'm trying to put my pants on, I realize I'm putting my shirt on, I'm trying to put my feet down my arms. So I had to pull it back off again, got myself dressed, and got, of course, the Huey helicopter, to this day, if I hear a Huey helicopter, my mood just goes to heck. You know, because there's no other helicopter sounds like a Huey. Slap, 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 slap. The blade slapped, you know, in just a peculiar way. And it didn't matter where, you could always tell it was a Huey coming in. And then they had a great big Chinook helicopter when they had to evacuate a whole bunch of casualties, and then they take them to the MASH units, the field units by Saigon and whatnot. But I was at basically a first clearing station. That's where I was at. And so they wake me up in the middle of the night. I go out there, and the first Huey lands, and there's one guy's being helped off. He's walking, but he's screaming at the top of his voice, "Oh Jesus! Oh Jesus!" And he's got pellets all in his legs and whatnot. What happened? They got out there in the jungle and they walked into a Claymore mine. The Americans, the Claymore mine was kind of a shaped charge, kind of a putty with a bunch of steel ball bearings embedded in it. And when you trip it, it would just scatter this incredible shower of ball bearings. And the Viet Cong had captured it and turned it around, and this patrol walked right into it. He was the flank man. The guy that was Hispanic, I remember that, he was a Hispanic guy, just screaming. But the guy who walked straight into it was a young black man. And you know, that's something that is really hard for me to understand, because back in the States, you know, the blacks were being so badly disrespected. But in Vietnam, the blacks were in the infantry units, they were going to prove themselves. And so when the job came up for point or flank on the patrols, they would volunteer for it. In fact, they'd even fight among themselves to have it. They were going to prove they were just as good as anybody else. So an awful lot of young black men lost their lives that way, walking point, to prove that they were just as good as anybody else.
And they were just as good whether they did that or not.
That's right. And they were better, actually. They were better. They had better reflexes. They were good soldiers. And meanwhile, people were running them down, but these were from the Wolfhounds. The 25th Division had a special unit that I think went clear back to the Second World War, called the Wolfhounds. But, you know, the Wolfhounds, there weren't any tall soldiers in the Wolfhounds. They were all little guys, little white guys, little Hispanic guys. Because the Viet Cong in those units like that were constantly engaged. Viet Cong killed all the big ones. Bigger are, the harder they fall, you know what I'm saying? And so they would, by the time they'd been out in the field for a month or two, they would shake down to little guys. And that's what the Wolfhounds looked like at that time, with the little guys. But when unloading that helicopter, one was unloaded out on a stretcher with a poncho over him. That's what you did in the field, you wrap people up on a poncho. And he was set down in fact, in front of the helicopter. And the Huey took off, and, well, the doctor knew I wasn't experienced. And I was out on the pad. And he said, stay out on the pad with the other casualties. And there were other casualties, but I was standing right next to this one. And the helicopter took off, and it blew the poncho off of him. And I'm looking at a young black man, and there's just enough moonlight that I can see this incredible smile on his face. He's got a smile of almost divine relief. It's a wonderful smile on his face, but he's missing everything from his rib cage to his genitals. He's been completely cleaned out. He's the point man that walked into that Claymore. And I looked at that and I said, "Oh Jesus." I said, "Heavenly Father, back somewhere in the States, there's a family wondering how their boy's doing in Vietnam, and I'm standing here right now with him, and I see the smile on his face." I said, "Please, Heavenly Father, prepare their hearts for the message that they're going to receive in the next few days." That was my prayer that night as I stood up. That's the only way I could deal with what I was feeling, was to turn it to Heavenly Father at that moment. I just prayed. and so anyway, I worked at the clearing station, but I got to know a fellow named Michael Murray. Michael Murray was a conscientious objector, and there were a lot of them in the medical units. I wasn't, but I served in Germany with him. I served in Vietnam with him. And so he kind of showed me the ropes around the medical thing, you know, helped me get oriented and dealing with the casualties. And of course the bodies, you know, they had a place further down where they had these big steel pan sort of things with a drain in them where they'd wash the bodies up, and then they'd stuff cotton in the body orifices and whatnot so they wouldn't leak, and they'd start preparing them for where they'd transport them to Saigon and eventually put them in a coffin and send them home all sterilized, you know. But Michael was, he kind of helped me get through it. He was from San Francisco, right smack in the heart of San Francisco, not far from the harbor, well, what they call the, Carolyn? She's not here, I thought she was here. So anyway, he was the one that kind of got me through this, but like I say, he really hated the war, and he was a Baha'i. That was his religion. He was a Baha'i. He wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist or a lot of the other ones. But he was Baha'i. He was a conscientious objector. And he had a magazine called Ramparts Magazine, which was a very left-wing radical magazine at the time. And he had a copy, and on the front cover is Christ on the cross, and there's two American infantry men with fixed bayonets guarding Christ on the cross, and several Roman soldiers, two American infantrymen, you know, which is a little startling in that environment. But I guess that was kind of their statement on war, you know, the faces interchangeable, whether you're a Roman soldier or American, you just do your duty, you know, that kind of thing. But anyway, he lent the magazine to me, so I went back and I was reading it in the tent, and the colonel walks into the tent, my favorite colonel. And everybody pops attention, you know, you go to attention, he's walking through it. He sees that magazine laying on my bunk with the picture of Christ and the two soldiers. He hits the roof. I didn't know what I could say, you know, but I knew he was a devout Catholic, I knew that much about him. But he starts in, son, let me talk to you, you know, like the priest, like I'm taking confession or something. You know, he said, well, this is a vehicle of the communists and this, that, and the other, and absolutely an inappropriate display of an American soldier, and you should never be reading that. And so, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. Well, he leaves. Well, next thing I know, I'm on the KP row.
Oh.
But I'm not on convoy, and I'm not back at the medical clearing station. I'm not doing that anymore. So this goes on just before Christmas. And so anyway, the 25th Division publishes a Christmas card and distributes it to everybody. And you know, so you can send it home to your folks, this, that, and the other. And Pond, was the specialist, the cook's name, KP, he liked me because he said I got the dishes cleaner than anybody else. He said I was very conscientious in what I did. And I did. I always was careful with what I did. So he let me finish up early, so I got to go. It was about a block away. I got to see the Bob Hope show and watch Nancy Sinatra strut out, "These boots are made for walking," and that's just what, you know, very fascist kind of things. Boots, you know. But Bob Hope was funny, and Joey Heatherton, all these cute girls, and of course the GIs are all, you know, frothing, going crazy. You know, Bob Hope is a great comedian, you know. And so I got to watch the whole show and this, that, and the other. So anyway, these Christmas cards came around, and right on the cover, you know, the 25th Division emblem with the three Magi riding over the horizon and two 25th Infantry GIs in full battle gear pointing with their M16s, pointing at the Magi.
Wow.
And so, and the colonel thought that you were off base with stuff that was inappropriate.
Well,
after he sat you out in the middle of the road.
Yeah. Well, that was 40th. That was 40th Medical Division I was in at that point at Cu Chi. And so I'm on KP, and me, I'm a little loony, I think. So what I did is I made out a Christmas card to the colonel, and inside I signed it, "Merry Christmas, Happy KP Day or something like that, some stupid little thing. He was up. He wanted me out of his unit. He wanted me court-martialed. He wanted me Article 15. I had affronted him in his world, you know. He wanted either court-martial me or Article 15. So he writes this thing up, and are we running?
Yeah.
He was really super mad. I think I got him where it hurts, you know. And so he wanted Article 15. Article was a minor discipline. If not that, he'd wanted to court-martial me. So he makes up the papers and he sends it into Colonel Brown in Saigon. And Colonel Brown in Saigon was the one who was over all the dental units in Vietnam at that time, I think, or at least the ones that were in that region. I'm not sure what his command reach was. But he was a really jolly, kind of chubby guy. And when he'd come into the units and visit the units, and hi guys, you know, one of those kind of people, and Colonel Brown, he'd have a camera strapped off this side of him and another, you know, snapping pictures. Anyway, he receives this order from Colonel Watertank, and I heard it from, when I processed out of the unit, I heard it from one of the things. He says, what happened, Peter? Said, well, I said I had kind of a problem. He said, well, when Colonel Brown received this request from your colonel, he burst out laughing. He burst out laughing. He thought it was hilarious. and he said, I'm not going to court-martial that young man, you know. Sent you a Christmas card that said Happy KP Day or whatever it said. But he said, I'll give you an alternative. We can transfer him to another unit. Okay, that's what I want. I want him out of the unit. So that's when they sent me from Cu Chi to Pleiku in the Central Highlands. I went from the 40th Medical Detachment to the Central Highlands of Vietnam, to an entirely different part of Vietnam. I saw a lot of country, you know. A lot of guys stayed in one spot and never saw anything else. But so I got sent to Pleiku. They put me on a C-130, flew me up to Pleiku. I remember throwing my duffel bag off, I think, off the back of the plane. You know, the planes roll. The planes would fly into those obscure airstrips and stuff. They stay really high altitude to avoid ground fire, and when they get right to the edge of the runway, they just drop. I described it at the time as being strapped in a box car and dropped into hell. It was just sort of like, boom! It would just drop like that, and your stomach just went right up your throat. They'd hit the runway, they'd roll, put down the back ramp, throw your gear off, and jump off the thing, and then the plane would just fly it back out and gain altitude. That's how, you know. And so I'm in Pleiku. I had been on that runway once before because we had landed there when I first arrived in Vietnam. So I'm in a familiar place. I had never seen Pleiku. I got sent out to 4th Infantry Division, which was at a place called, well, the GIs called it Titty Mountain, because it was two perfectly symmetrical mountains side by side, and the base camp was built right up against the side of the mountain, and it was a dental unit. It was the one I had been in Cu Chi was a 40th KJ. This was I was now in 39th KJ, so it was an identical unit. No dental lab. None. I couldn't do any of that. So I'm back in the same spot. They've got me. Nobody tried to discipline me or anything else. It was just a new guy in the unit, but they didn't have anything for me to do. They had the dentist. They had a Quonset kind of a hut. I found a picture of that last night that I didn't know I had. And so that's where the dentists were, and that's where the dental chairs and the dental assistants were. But me, I was dentist on the loose. What do you do with me? And that's the time of my life, and I'll confess, at the time of my life I said, you know, I just get jerked around all over this crazy country, you know. I said, I think Heavenly Father's trying to tell me, dummy, you should have gone on a mission, you know. You know, but it kind of hit me that the Lord was giving me the tour of my own ambivalence, I think. But there, like I say, what do you do? So Sergeant Rude scooped me up. Sergeant Rude was the classic lifer. big, big bellicose kind of guy, but he wore this funny little hat. He was borderline clown, but he was the. You ever seen the movie or the series Sergeant Bilko?
Oh, yeah.
He'd been in the Army a long time. He knew all the angles, he knew all the tricks, and he was a total smoozer. He knew how to get things done, and he saw me. Aha! I have found an accomplice. and so, you know, so finally he had somebody who he could involve in his various forays. I do remember I did do some convoy work again. I did a convoy from Pleiku down Highway 1. They call it the Street Without Joy. It was a run to pick up supplies at the coast at Quignon. And so I went down that Highway 1, long road, very dangerous road. It was probably the most attacked and whatnot road. So the convoys would set out with protection rolling with them. There wasn't a lot of room, a lot of hill stuff, and a lot of blind corners. So they rolled the jeeps with the convoys, and they didn't put out the tanks. They just were armed enough to where they could defend. Well, I remember this particular convoy. The convoy got hit. It was a long convoy, further up from me, and so I'm sitting in the vehicle back behind them in a jeep with a trailer on the back because they're expecting me to pick up supplies and bring them back in the trailer. And we wait for a while, and they clear up the problem. The convoy moves on, and thankfully they didn't attack the back end of the convoy where I was. So we got down to Quignon, and the Central Highlands was elevated enough that the weather wasn't that gritty, sweaty kind of like it was down in the lowlands. It was a little cooler. It was still mud, you know, and rain. I can remember when I arrived at Pleiku, they had a monsoon that had filled the mess hall. I mean, three feet of water in the mess hall in a matter of about half an hour.
Well,
And later monsoons, the distance between the entrance to this GP medium tent and that GP medium tent was about the width of this living room. And when the rain was coming down, it was so thick that looking out of the entrance of the tent at the next tent over, it was just a blur through. You could just barely see the tent through the blur of this wall of water that was coming down. Incredible monsoons in that part of the country. But and I remember arriving at Quignon to pick up supplies, and I'm sitting in the shade, and the water's just streaming off of me, the sweat. I'm back in the sweatland again, and somebody commented that the temperature was 126 degrees that day.
that's rough.
Yeah, but I didn't even have to move. All I had to do was just stand still, and sweat was just pouring off, and you know. And so I drank what I could find. I was drinking 3.2 beer, which you could find. It was never iced. It was always room temperature. Once in a while I could get 7-Up, something like that. But when you sweated 7-Up, it made your sweat sticky. And so it was very uncomfortable to drink soda pop because it had the sugar was not, didn't work with sweating heavy. But I remember getting rehydrated. I remember going back up the coast on that convoy. But here's Sergeant Root's still there. He's waiting for me. He knew he was a supply sergeant for those medical and the dental units there. And so he knew all the other supply sergeants in all the motor pool, the infantry units, yada, all the air, the helicopter units. And these guys all were, the old-timers, lifers, and they all had kind of friends with each other. And when he needed supplies, he'd go over there and work out deals, and then he'd slip them supplies from our, but that was how, and without that, the Army really wouldn't have worked very well. There had to be guys like that knew how to move stuff around.
Sounds like radar and mash.
Because you need something, you order from the States, maybe you're going to get 2.5 months later. In the meantime, you're out of stuff. Well, he had established a relationship with it wasn't Special Forces. The Special Forces, the Green Berets had turned Plato Lim over to the Rangers by that point in the war, as I recall. And he had made acquaintances with Sergeant Leathers out there and found out that they had some real supply problems. The military advisors and the Rangers came under an older supply chain that went clear back to before the big buildup, because the military advisors, the Green Berets, all this stuff, had been in Vietnam the longest. And so they had an entire different supply line. And the infantry divisions, the regular army, had their own supply lines. And he couldn't get critical parts for his weapons. He couldn't get enough. Sergeant Leathers, at Plato Lim, they had it had been built like the Green Berets, like I said. It was an outer defense perimeter, which was defended by these rather primitive bunkers, and then a secondary inner defense perimeter. That picture of me holding the AK-57, I'm standing inside the inner defense perimeter in that picture, you know. And so that's the next phase of my life. And they were over all the Montagnard villages in the area, as far as defending. But the South Vietnamese government was trying to encroach in the area and gain control themselves over the Montagnards. Well, the Montagnards were Khmer people. They were the original habitants of Vietnam. If you ever hear of Angkor Wat, the Khmer civilization,
Yeah,
the Khmer Rouge and all that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Khmer Rouge, yeah, right.
Yeah. Those people,
Angkor Wat.
those people were the original inhabitants of Indochina and built those high civilizations. In fact, that one picture of that ruined building goes back to the Khmer people. The Vietnamese people pushed down from China sometime historically and basically captured the coastal plain and pushed the Khmer people into the mountains. And those were the Montagnards. That's a French name of the mountain people, you know, whatever it is. The Montagnards hated the South Vietnamese, hated, deep and virulent hatred, and felt like they'd been robbed of their heritage. The South Vietnamese had pushed them into the margin, not unlike the Highlands clearings and some of the things historically we talk about, you know. But Sergeant Leathers was a very practical man. I remember the first time I went out there, I got initiated into the Montagnard tribe. They took me to the Montagnard village, and they had these 4 posts with a kind of a shed over the top, like it was banana leaves and different things. And right in the middle of this area, there was a great big earthen jar. Oh, it was kind of bulby like this, and it came up to a lip. It was about this tall, which would make it maybe 2.25 feet, maybe, you know. And it was full of new pie, which was the Montagnard drink, which was basically, and because I admired the jug and they gave it to me. These native people, you know, you admire some, watch out because they give it to you, you know. Oh, you like to give it to you. And when I took the new pie jar, but maybe that comes later. I'll tell you now though. Back to 4th Division, back to Titty Mountain, Camp Holiday. They had a name for it. Let me use the right.
Camp Holiday.
Camp Holiday, but nobody called it that. And I dissected it. There was water, and then there would be a layer of banana leaves. And under that layer of banana leaves, there was a layer of squished bananas. And another layer of banana leaves. And under that layer was rice. And under the next layer was squished bananas. Rice, bananas, rice, all the way. As I took that thing apart, all the way to the bottom was alternating banana mash and rice. And they'd put these things to the side, they'd seal and put leaf over the top and seal it, apparently, and they let it ferment. Yeah. And so it was a primitive rice banana wine. And right at the very, very top where the water floated on the top, there was a stick sticking up, just a little twig sticking up out of the banana leaf. And the initiation meant they had this big straw. It was, I don't know how they got that thing to hollow. I mean, a straw that long, but that straw must have been that long. And it went down into the bottom of the mash, and for initiation, you sucked on that thing as hard as you can until the water went down and touched the stick that was sticking up. then you drank enough. Then they put the little brass bracelet on you, and they did the little ritual and everything, and you were now part of the Montagnard tribe in the Highlands. And so,
Did you have a headache for 3 days?
well, number one, I was it looked so primitive. I'm probably going to get food poisoning or something. But I really wasn't even drinking alcohol. Even then, I was having some problems with my intestines, and that it really comes to a head when I'm at Pleiku, which shows up in my medical records is why they rated me for the, for my losing my colon and stuff, because of what happens as time progresses. So I'm sucking out, and I'm just kind of being really hesitant. And the chief, oh no, whatever. He reaches over and he ladles some more water out of a little bowl and throws it in there. So now I've got to drink down
more.
another inch and a half, And of course I'm sucking alcohol off the bottom with this long straw, right? I'm not getting diluted water. I'm getting the real deal,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that day that Brewer, and that's with Brewer the driver, Sergeant Rood in the passenger seat, and me draped across the back seat. I was dizzy. I was draped across the back seat when they took me back that first day. It was really interesting. These Montagnard villages, they were circular, and they were like a bamboo fence. But outside of the fence there was a ditch, and in the ditch there was all these sharpened bamboo spikes. They call them punji sticks, and hundreds of them, just a wall of punji sticks sticking out from the face of the ditch. So if a village was attacked, the person would have to go through the ditch and through the punji sticks and over the wall. And then when you got into the center, there was a ring of miniature Montagnard hutches. And they were little bamboo straw houses that stood up on stilts, right off of the ground, maybe this high off the ground. And that's where they put their animals at night. They put their animals in these little houses and these all around. And then, as you went into the center, then the regular houses of the people circled around in the village. And then right at the center there would be where the Nupai jar was and the covered thing. And then there was this high fence that enclosed a bunch of totems. And so they were like totem poles, but they were, oh goodness, 10, 12, 14 feet high. You could see them sticking up above the fence, and various warriors that had been brave in their society would have a totem carved to them. It was a matrilineal society. Everything was run by the women, which is very interesting. But brave men, warriors, would have these statues. And in this particular grove, there was one statue. The guy was wearing a black uniform with white cross bandelows and a French pillbox hat. It was some Frenchman back during Frenchman rule who had done something for the village that he rated being a hero in the totem circle. So there was actually a totem to some French legionnaire long gone, in the village totem.
Free Dien Bien Phu.
Yeah.
Bien Phu, I mean.
Yeah, very much so. But friendly people, the only way I can describe the way they move through the world is, if you ever watch Fish in the Sea, how they all move together as a group and they all turn at the same time and turn to go the other way, or birds will do the same. They just move like they're, 100 birds, but one consciousness, and that's the way these people worked in a different way. The way they, whenever I remember filling sandbags for the defenses and whatnot, the shoveling, filling, but this just flow. When they would wash their hands, when they'd done, I have a picture of them washing their hands. One of them would pour, and the other half dozen would all get in and wash their hands at the same time. It was a little bit like when we lived in Japan, and when you'd see the guy digging the ditch, he'd jam the shovel in, he'd hand it up to the next guy, and then the next guy would empty the dirt out. It was just a seamless flow. Mr. John Wayne did not live in the Montagnard village. It was no rugged individual. It was just flow. Everything was flow. Everything worked that way together. And so Sergeant Leathers had his own private army out there, and to patrol the area, and his two point men were really, really good with blowguns and crossbows. And these guys were deadly. I mean, they did night patrols and everything else, and the North Vietnamese would stay away from them, you know, because they were that dangerous. But when they were in the village, one of them, I got a picture of one of them, he's got his baby back on his back, he's got his papoose on his back.
Showed me that.
He's carrying his baby around. He was the most dangerous man in the village, and he's carrying the baby around on his back. You know, make you in the village, that's the way it was. And the women were bare-breasted. It was a very primitive sort of thing. But the South Vietnamese moved in and tried to build a similar kind of a little fortification of their own. But they weren't fortification against the VC. They were fortifying against the Montagnards. The South Vietnamese were so afraid of the Montagnards and afraid the Montagnards would get them. So that's the kind of animosity they had. So one day Sergeant Leathers, and I'm going back and forth with Sergeant Rude. Sergeant Leather needs ammo. He's always needing parts for weapons. And he's got antiquated, he's got Thompson out there. Nobody was using Thompsons anywhere else except the Rangers and the Special Forces. And they were using a version of the M16, but it was a little bit different. But some of the parts, they call it an AR-15 now, but it was a very similar weapon. But some of the parts were interchangeable, and he needed those kinds of things. He had enough of a private army going up there that he never had enough food to feed them, so he was always short on sea rations, and on and on and on. All the things he couldn't get through his chain of command without sweating, you know, sweating blood really to get it. And so Sergeant Rude became the link, and we became part of the delivery force. And when the Montagnard women would start to have babies, they had a terrible mortality rate. Montagnard babies would often die, and the sanitation was awful. And so bring the Montagnard women to the perimeter of Camp Holiday and whatnot, and then talk to the doctors, and they would help deliver some of the babies. That kind of thing was going on back and forth. And pills, I can remember, you know, dao 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 boom, you know, dao 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 boom, headaches, stomach aches. They wanted pills, they wanted medicines. The chief's daughter was sick for a while, but you had to be really, really careful, because you couldn't say, take this bottle of pills and take one every 4 hours for 2 weeks, and you should be better. They'd look at that and say, wow, better in 2 weeks? The whole bottle. So when you were there, you had to go around to the hutches individually and distribute the medicines, you know, that kind of thing, you know. And so we became kind of an ad hoc, what they call medical civil action. It wasn't an official call, but that's what we were doing. We were actually doing kind of and so the Montagnards, and then Rude his thing on the side, in order to get things from the supply sergeants back in the base, he was, the Montagnards made beautiful tribal cloth, and they carved beautiful crossbows, and beautiful, and they made really nice, beautiful models of a Maybach, of a helicopter, Huey, little models of the Huey, and all this kind of cool tribal stuff. And so Sergeant Rude would take this back into the base camps, and the guys would eat it up, the supply sergeants. So he was trading Montagnard goods for supplies, then to take back to Sergeant. So that's the loop I got caught in at that point in time. Funny, you know, funny stuff. But you know, it was so far out away from the base camp, where the Playa de Lim was, the Special Forces camp, that and there was no convoy, and there was nobody to protect you on the road. And all the way out there, I remember seeing a blown up bus in the ditch, and blowing up trucks off the side of the roads, and a lot that hit mines, you know, out there on the roads. So Sergeant Leather's theory was, if you put your pedal to the metal, or metal to the whatever, you know what I'm saying, and go as fast as you can, if you hit a mine, maybe it'll blow off behind you. So we would leave the 4th Division base camp and just scream over these muddy roads. And when it got really rainy, it wasn't practical, but dust everywhere. It's just dust in your, you know, everywhere. Your clothes, your white T-shirts all became kind of a brownish mud pink after, you know, it even showed through the green of the uniform. Everything took on this red. It's like Georgia red mud. If you've ever been down to Georgia, that red mud, it's like that there. It's clay and really red. it just saturates everything. The clouds of dust would be roaring across that plane to where I just never hit a mine. One night we had a kind of an incident. It was almost dusk, and Rude and I, well, Brewer is sitting in the Jeep. He's sitting in the driver's seat. I'm in the back with my rifle across my lap. I'm Mr. Armed Guard, as always, Mr. Shotgun. And Rude's in the chief's house. He's giving pills to the chief's daughter. And right across the plane, here comes a person. He's wearing a pith helmet, and he's wearing a white medical smock, and he's pushing a bicycle. He's got these big satchels off the side of this bicycle, and he's pushing across the area at sundown. It's a North Vietnamese medic. If you look through the books on the Vietnam War, and at the time I thought, why in the world is he wearing a white tunic out in the middle of nowhere? Well, it was more brown than white, but in that environment. Until I went through a reference book years later and showed a picture of a North Vietnamese medic wearing a white tunic. And I said, oh, that's what it was. That's what's happening. He saw us. And he stopped, and you could see he was startled. They were doing double duty. They were coming in at night when the sun went down and doing their own medical civil action or whatever they were doing. But we were doing the daytime and they were doing the nighttime. He stopped and he looked at me, and I've got to, across that distance, and I'm looking at him. And I say, Rude, come on, let's get out of here. I call to Rude in the hutch, and Brewer's onto what's going on now. Because oftentimes, if you have people like that coming in, you might have regular armed units coming in behind them, And he was obviously, as far as I'm concerned, the real deal. I've thought about it. Was he really that? But the look on his face and the way he reacted to us, and the way he reacted to the fact that I'm there with a weapon,
And he didn't pull out a weapon.
He didn't have a weapon.
That's the point. So he probably was medical.
But he froze him in his tracks. But Rude is in there and he's smoozing away. Rude, endless, He could talk the leg off or whatever,
Wouldn't Indian?
Yeah, one of them. But then, so I see the guy's really kind of stressed. You know what I do? I reach up with my hand and I wave to him. And I watched his shoulders drop. And then he goes ahead and just, he's moving a little faster now. He's pushing his bicycle out of the clearing into the next tree line. By that time, Rude's out. I said, hey, we're out too late. We're out putting medicine. We need to get out of here and explain what was going on. He got it. And we DD out of the, got out of there as quick as we could. But that was, I didn't feel in any danger. I just felt, as I looked at this guy, I felt a deep sense of empathy. That was me standing over there, caught in a, I mean, I had the weapon. He didn't have the weapon. He was a medic. I was a medic. I just felt just a deep sense of empathy for him. How do I relieve his feeling? Because you could see it. I waved to him, and that broke it. That broke the moment.
He thinks he's about ready to die.
Yeah, he doesn't know what's going to happen.
American soldier with a weapon sitting here looking at me.
And not just an M16. I've got an M14. I've got twice the range. Those M16s, they, shoot them past 500 yards and they'll stick in a tree like a dart. That's the M16. They just didn't have any stopping power. What I had was a weapon that was designed for European land combat, at ranges up to 5,000 yards in some cases, So I had, but the Army, that's another whole story. The Army got sold this bill of goods. There was some congressman who was backing the M16 factory, and so they started shipping them to Vietnam before they were ever properly tested. The M14 was an elaboration of the old M1 Garand. They just made it more efficient where it could take a full magazine, and they put a flash deflector on and stuff, but it was a glorified M1, well-tried battle implement, where the M16s at first were a disaster, but that's another story. Since I didn't have to carry one, I will leave that one in the dust. So that kind of thing goes back and forth, and then one day Jane Mansfield arrives at the helicopter pad. And of course all the enlisted men have been kind of off assigned to do what they're doing, but all the officers, of course, they swarm this helicopter and they're all smoozing around. They're practically rubbing. It's like watching a group of cats rubbing. They're just it's funny, and they're just doing all this thing. And her manager or whoever he is with her. He's there, but because I wasn't assigned to the dental clinic, because that particular day I'm out and about, you know. And what was I doing that day? I don't remember. But I went and grabbed my little camera. I actually took some pictures of her. It was only a few weeks later she was decapitated in that terrible road accident down in the south somewhere. So that was only a few weeks before she died, and those pictures were taken. But what else can I tell you about Pleiku? Oh, laundry run. Guess who gets to do laundry run? Right, I'm the spare.
Look you.
Oh, dental lab technician stuff.
So load up all the dirty clothes, take them into to DX exchange. Well, in Vietnam, you get issued. I was issued actually the first version of the jungle fatigues. I wish I hadn't worn them out painting, because they're valuable. The first issues with the exposed buttons, those were the original jungle fatigues, and the collectors they're just gold. I was issued the first issue, and then later I got second issue. But in Vietnam, if you tore a thing, especially the combat guys, where you were always tearing stuff up, you went to DX, direct exchange. And they just, no questions, they gave you a uniform. And so a lot of the, you could tell a lot of the infantrymen, because they didn't even have their name tags sewn on them or anything, because they were just wearing DX stuff. They tear it up and turn it in, turn it back, whereas the guys that were more in the base camps, they'd have all the stripes sewn on, and the unit patches and yada yada yada, you know. But so there was a station where you could take all the dirty laundry, and that's what we did. Took a deuce and a half truck right in the middle of monsoon. That picture I took with that truck buried in the mud down to its chassis, that was on a laundry run. And so we go into Pleiku, the actual town of Pleiku, drop the stuff off. But I'm with two black GIs who kind of had that was also the job that was kind of given them too. So I went with them. I was I guess I was supposed to be in charge of them. I never felt that way. They were both great guys. But they had their vices like most young soldiers. So we're coming out, and they don't want to come back to the base camp. They want to stop at Trung Bang too. Well, I don't want to stop at Trung Bang too. I have no business at Trung Bang too. I never used a prostitute in Vietnam, ever. I never used a prostitute in my life. But in Vietnam, the Win Cao Ki and Thu, the leader Thu, the Thu family, part of their kickback for the government thing is they own a huge corporation of prostitute houses all throughout Vietnam. And they had struck up a deal with the American Army that the American medics would inspect them, make sure disease and all this stuff. The Army was directly involved in inspecting them to keep them clean, and the Thu family was raking in the dough. So these black guys want to stop at Trung Bang too. Oh, okay, there you go. So I'm sitting out in the truck, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and they come back with big smiles on their faces, you know. And back into the base camp we go. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I was doing. Well, then it came time to go on R&R to Japan. Well, you know, most of the guys wanted to go to Thailand. In fact, it was like a 75–80% choice, I'm guessing. But almost everybody wanted to go there, because when you arrived in Thailand, they had these things waiting, a girl waiting for you who became your constant companion during your entire stay, took care of you, slept with you, the whole thing, and then you leave. The whole thing was set up to create this rest and recreation, is what it was called, R&R, you know. I didn't want anything to do with that. I would have liked to have seen Thailand, you know, those wonderful pagodas and stuff. But I said, no, I'm going to use this to go back to Japan. So that picture of me, I'm sitting it's a Canadian-built aircraft. I can't remember what they call those things. But that picture of me in one of those is on my way to Cam Ranh Bay to catch a plane to Japan. And we arrive in Cam Ranh Bay, and my jaw's on my chest. I remember this blank strand of sand with a 50-ton dock crane and a tent city, and those were Now the roads are completely paved. They got street lights, and on the landward side of the road, they've got these huge metal prefabricated buildings. It's a bloomin' city. It's a bloomin' city. I mean, it's so developed. You almost didn't think you were in the States. That's how it had changed just in that interval from when I had been there the first time. So off to Japan I go. And we arrived, I'm not sure the air base, but because we were Army, they took us to Camp Zama. Remember, we were there, Camp Zama was the Army base. So I'm bussed into Camp Zama, and there they released us for R&R. So I want to go visit where we lived in Tachikawa, but I'm with 3 GIs, the 2 of them black, one of them's white. His daddy's a railroad man from back east somewhere, and he's got to see the bullet train. He's just got to see the bullet train. So they actually released us in Tokyo, and I remembered Karakuen Park when I was a kid there. That was where you could go and sports activities, and they had legitimate massages and saunas and stuff like that. You weren't going to fall into the whole prostitute scene. So they were ready to go off, and I said, well, I know a place where you can get a really good massage and sauna and get cleaned up and everything, and they won't overcharge you. It's a very reasonable place. So out we go to Karakuen Park, and the first thing we do is we all undress and get into this sauna. And we're sitting in the sauna, 2 black guys, 2 white guys, and we start to sweat. And all of us had come out of the Central Highlands. And down our bodies is running rivulets of red mud. Just rivulets down our legs, down our arms, down our torsos. And there's a Japanese guy, and he said, "Arisho!" I said to him, Vietnam, and he said, "Oh, I guess." You know, all that stuff was just ground into our bodies. And they had these showers in Vietnam. They were either made out of wingtip from airplanes or 50-gallon drums stacked up and welded together. And you'd go in there and you'd step under it, cold water, and if you were lucky in the hotter weather, it would warm up and you'd get a warm shower out of them. You know, the sun would play on them, and sometimes you see them, they paint them black. But that's the only kind of showers we had. And until I got to play coup, and one of the infantry units had received a compressor with this thing that pumped hot water. I got a hot shower at one point in time, but I never realized how much mud was caked into my body. All 4 of us, we were just running blood red rivulets of mud down our bodies to cleanse after that experience. And then after that, I headed for Tachikawa. And my buddy, who wanted to ride the train, went down and got on the bullet train. Didn't realize it went all the way down where it did. He wasn't back till the next day. We shared a hotel room together in Tokyo. In fact, that picture of me sitting at that little table is in a hotel room in Japan. Mm-hmm. And I checked into a Japanese-style hotel the first day, but he didn't like it all. Sit on the floor in a kimono. I just felt like, you know. But he wouldn't have it, so we ended up checking into a more conventional hotel with a bed, and so that's what we did. And, but I headed for Tachikawa, got on base, went out to where our house was, walked right up to our old house, took a picture of it. I think we went to PX, went to the snack. Remember where the snack bar was over by the base theater?
Oh, absolutely.
I went over there and got something to eat and just kind of knocked around the base. And my great regret is I didn't get on the train and go to Shomei, because now Shomei doesn't exist. Every aerial photograph I've seen, it's gone. It's been taken over by Toyota, and that whole village is bye-bye. But that's what I think. That's what it looks like anyway. But I had a good time, you know, just visiting a place that I knew in Tokyo. But down on the Ginza and went through the big department stores and stayed out of the Shinjuku and Ikebukuro areas and stuff, you know. I was being a good boy.
Where'd you get, about a week there? Or?
Yeah, 7 days. Yeah. And next thing you know, we're back in my unit in Pleiku. Well, when I got back to Pleiku, they were just starting to build the first little wood barracks. And up to this time, the entire time, 11 months or so, I had lived in tents. That's all I ever knew was tents, or sometimes pretty primitive conditions. But suddenly, we're starting to look like civilization. And I kind of got into it, and I enjoyed it, but it was a matter of weeks, and I was on my way home. And that was kind of the end of my Vietnam experience, in a nutshell. There is one postscript. So anyway, I'm sent to Play Coup sometime in January '67 after Christmas. I do remember that. But according to my record, it says that I departed Vietnam 39th Medical Detachment, Play Coup, 7th of, well actually I departed there 7th of August and actually flew out of the country on 12th of August 1967. So I've got some dates there. While I was at Play Coup, I got really sick. Me and a dentist, actually, one of the officers. Dentists are always officers, And oh, terrible thing. It couldn't hold anything down. Everything that went through our body was like bright yellow. It was the only person I ever talked to, I thought, who could have told me what it was. It probably was dysentery, and that triggered the colitis in me. I think genetically, because of Mom and Aunt Lizzie and whatnot, that some families do heart attacks, some families do strokes, some families do colitis. So I think we had a proclivity for that sort of thing in our family, and so that kind of sets the scene for the medical issues which came up later. But we got to they flew us out. We landed in Fort Lewis, Washington. I can't remember what the name of the air base was, but it was interesting. I just saw something else you ought to get. Well, before I left Cu Chi, one of the last things I did, and it's an interesting story because technically I probably should have received a unit commendation for it at Cu Chi, because it just turned out that way. Not that I did anything special, but as always, I was the spare body around at Cu Chi that never could make a denture because they weren't set up to do it. But there was a call went out to the division that they to send out a doctor and his assistants out. Yeah, right before I left Cu Chi to go up to Play Coup, they needed somebody to go on out to Dao Tieng to be part of, as I learned later, historically Anvil Force for Operation Cedar Falls. And so I was just kind of thrown into the breach. You go. And so I went with a doctor, and we convoyed from Cu Chi to Tay Ninh, right by that beautiful the Cao Dai church, which the Viet Cong fought that final battle at the end of the war and killed all those loyal Cao Dais and destroyed that church. But then it was still beautiful and gorgeous, painted in bright colors. Remember going by that, we stopped at another dental unit on the outside there, and they had just been mortared the night before, and they had killed one of the dentists. He had just arrived from the States, and they put him in a new tent section, and they hadn't had time to sandbag up around the edge of the tent like they always did for mortar stuff. And here the guy just got in country, mortar rounds, and killed him. And and apparently it was he had a best friend there who was just absolutely distraught over that. Many years later, when I had an injury from work at working for the city of Newark, I was sent to a specialist on hand injuries, and we got to talking, and he had a book there. He and Henry Fonda, a picture of he and Henry Fonda together on the cover of the book, and I said, "Oh, you're in Vietnam?" And I said, "I was in Vietnam too." And he asked me where I was, and I said I was at Cu Chi. He said, "Oh, he said I was at Tay Ninh with the medical unit." Really? Yeah, I said, "Yeah, I convoyed through Tay Ninh on my way to Dao Tieng during Operation Cedar Falls, where I had been assigned to be part of the Anvil Force. And when I arrived, they had just been mortared the night before. the water barrels up against the hooches were all full of holes, and I understood a dentist had been killed there, and he just kind of blanched. He said, that fellow that was killed that night was my very best friend. He said, you were there that morning? I said, yes, I was there that morning, that very morning after your friend died. So it was just one of those coincidental moments. And so he gave me a copy of his book and talked about his experience. So we went ahead and convoyed out to Dao Tiang, and I have some pictures of all the infantry loading onto the helicopters. And I got a picture of me with Joe Cool with my M14 over my shoulder. But as it turned out, that everybody involved in that operation received a Presidential Unit Citation. The fact is, I got kind of drawn into it at the last moment, so I was actually there and actually technically would have qualified for a Presidential Unit Citation, but we didn't do much because the Viet Cong aren't stupid, and we were Anvil Force, and Hammer Force was supposed to be pushing them towards us, and Viet Cong, instead of obliging, they went left and right. they demowed, and so we didn't have to actually face them there as a cohesive force, although I spent a very uncomfortable night in a slit trench. In fact, I remember telling myself, sitting in that slit trench, I said, someday, Dennis, you're going to get nostalgic about that. You've got to remember this night, because I was in that slit trench right next to this big 155, and he fired all night long. I never slept. I was down in the dirt and the mud, and I mean, other guys have it a lot worse, but that was a memorable night. So now we're back to Pleiku, which is a later phase. Part of the thing about keeping a perimeter in Vietnam, and this is at Camp Hollowell. One night, the guys on perimeter out there, they heard somebody in the barbed wire, and it was typically. You tried to figure out what's going on, and you put up a flare, and they put up a flare, and they couldn't quite see what was going on, but so they passed the word up the line to the officer. There was always an officer of the day in charge of the perimeter on those things, and asked permission what to do, and he said fire. And so they fired, and they immediately heard this incredible yowl and a screech. And that was kind of the end of it, although they could hear something moving around the rest of the night, and they weren't sure what was going on. Well, when they got out there, here's a tiger, a dead male tiger in the barbed wire, and a circle path kind of worn in the dirt out there where it looked like he had a female companion that circled it in the dirt most of the night, there by her dead mate. And so they hauled it up to the water point, which is where they had just installed those brand new pump showers I told you about that would heat water, and so the guys were all looking it over, and I was standing behind it, and somebody said, here, let me take your picture. So they popped a picture of me with a tiger. I would never kill a tiger deliberately. I'm not Mr. Joe Jungle, but that's how that tiger picture came about. Mm-hmm. That kind of answers your question. Now there's Phil asked me about that large snake. Now I don't know what kind of snake that was. I'm not sure what. I'd have to know what kind of snakes were native, but that thing was long enough that I think we lined up 4 or 5 of us, and we're all holding a part of him. Maybe I took the picture, and that thing's still longer than the group, so it was a huge old thing, and it was in the in a cage where Sergeant Leathers kept it. So that explains the snake. And that close-up with the snake and the fellow holding it, that skinny guy, in civilian clothes, he hated to put his uniform on, but he was a ranger, he was a trained Army Ranger. That's Sergeant Leathers himself in the flesh. Mm-hmm. Now when we got to Washington, they had it all set up to process lots of people through there quickly. So you got off the plane, went into this large hallway, and they told us to strip. And I was in jungle fatigues. People were not every sort of thing that they'd worn there. And I did. I stripped. In fact, I think I had put on a pair of khakis for the flight back. I wanted to be dapper then, I guess. So I stripped it all off and I threw it in the barrel and everybody else threw the, they had these big kind of cloth barrels hanging that you could throw all your stuff. Then they herded you in the shower with all these dozens and dozens of naked guys, and we all showered down. In the meantime, they had written down, each of us, what unit we were, what our rank was, this, that, and the other. And so I came out of the shower, and there was women, gee, there must have been 6 on one side, 6, maybe a dozen women in there busily sewing all the medals and decorations and ribbons on everybody's uniform, and they call your name and you'd go up and take it. And so I was, within, 45 minutes, I was back in a full dress green uniform. And so then they offered us a free steak dinner. And I didn't want to be bothered. I wanted to go home. And so they had the buses leaving at intervals from there, taking us to Seattle to the airport to fly us home. And so we got on the bus, they drove us to the Seattle airport, and we're climbing off the bus, and there's this sweet little old lady standing by the door of the bus, and she looks up and says, "God bless you boys for your service in Korea."
Oh, little kind of time.
Well, you know, guys kind of chuckled about it, but you know, a lot of guys complained that they never got welcome back and thanks for Vietnam. I got welcomed back and thanked by a little old lady in Seattle. She just got the war wrong.
For everything you did in Korea.
Yeah, and then I had a really funny experience. I was unsettled a little bit, and I knew it was a while before my flight would fly to Ontario. And so I went into there was a kind of a bar there in the airport, and I ordered a 7-Up, and they had these great big plush red Naugahyde chairs. The whole thing was decorated in red plush Naugahyde chairs, and I sat down and started to drink my drink, and I got sick to my stomach, and I had to leave. I said, "What's going on?" And you see, I had never seen that much red together in one place except the last time I'd seen guys bleeding. That red furniture triggered me. It just triggered me, seeing all that red. And then when we got out on the street, it was nighttime, but there was headlights on. There was lights. It wasn't pitch black. Because in Vietnam at night it's black. You know, unless you see a trip flare go up or something. And I didn't get sick about that, but it was just a novelty and not only were there cars with lights on them, but the cars were different color. They weren't all olive drab green, you know, or a camouflage, or, you know, the various things you saw over there. We saw both plain green and camouflage vehicles, and helicopters and airplanes, and on and on and on. So I finally get back home to Ontario, and, you know, the family, this, that, and the other. I go out to guest house to sleep, and I get into my bed, where I slept against the back wall, and I get into bed, and there I had carved my name in the wall, Dennis Wheeler. Do you remember that in the wall? My name was carved right in the wall of the guest house.
Carved there in the wood, and
Well, as I started to say, so I'm home. I'm back in the chicken coop, the guest house, and I rolled in my bed there against the wall. The end of my bed was right at the end of the guest house. Maybe it had been moved there while I was gone, but as I look at the walls, carved right into the wall is my name, Dennis Wheeler, and I got this incredible feeling like I'm home in bed. I'm looking at my name carved in the wall. Did I just have a bad dream? Did I really go to Vietnam? It just came right home immediately. Like, did that really happen? It was just like that, a feeling, did that really happen? But that was kind of the end of it. Of course, coming home, I had more time with the family, and I misunderstood the orders I'd been given from Vietnam, and I thought I had longer time to stay at home than I did, but I dutifully, when I thought I was supposed to be in Germany, got on the plane and flew out east, and then across landed in somewhere outside of Philadelphia, went around, toured the city of Philadelphia, and got in contact with the Swams out there, and went and stayed with the Swams. They were not too far from Valley Forge. They took me out to Valley Forge. We did a tour around the place. They're just as nice as they could be. Remember that little David, I think it was a
David was the boy,
Boy.
and Howard and Rita.
yeah, Howard and Rita, but they were nice as they could be to me. I mean, they just tucked me in like family, and so I had this really nice family interlude, and off I went to Germany.
Before you go to Germany,
Yeah,
you just brought up the fact that, you know, while you had leave, you went and saw some family. When you were at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio on July 4th of 1966, you had some leave, and where did you go then?
well, actually, there's two things I think of. Ended up going up to the Aubrey-Denton area of Texas and visiting with Wheeler relatives, which was kind of strange because there was people there. There was even one relative who looked like Dad, amazingly like Dad, and that,
Mordecai.
yeah, Mordecai, and one cousin. She was a doll, but she was engaged to a doctor. She was going to be married, and all the other relatives. But the funny thing was, I'm at the Wheeler family reunion. I'm the only one with the last name Wheeler. But they adored me. They just, in fact, Mordecai, he said, when you get out of the army, come here and work for me. I'll put you to work. He was ready to adopt me and move me to Texas right on the spot. But you know who I also went and hung out with while I was in, since you bring it up, we're going back in time. This is for the camera. We're going back to my training to become a dental lab tech back in Fort Sam Houston at San Antonio, Texas. But it was the Johnsons. Remember, we were with them in Japan?
That's before Jesse got in that wheelchair.
Yeah.
Jesse Jr.
Yeah. Well, the boys adopted me. We on weekends I went there. They fed me really good, and I'd go out with the boys and we cruise. Those guys like to go out and cruise in cars, and so I actually went out and cruised with them. We went around San Antonio together, and just like a bunch of old friends, like we'd known each other forever. And so that was kind of a sweetheart moment. Since I just remembered that.
Yeah.
Nice people.
Yeah, 'cause when you brought up the Schwabs, I thought, well, he went to see the Wheelers. Aunt Emma was there, Aunt Myrtle was there, Aunt Beulah was there. So there was three different branches, but they were McNats and Mordecai's and Rice's, because they were the girls.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I remember sitting down in a ring around, with the ring of them around me, and they looked at me like I was a nice birthday cake with candles on it or something. I mean, they were absolutely thrilled to have me there at that moment in time. And it was, being in the Army away from home, even though my feelings were somewhat limited, I still felt like I was among family. It was a nice moment in time too.
Okay, let's take you from Philadelphia and get you over to Germany now.
Well, okay, so off to Germany we go. I'd always wanted to go to Germany. Of course, Dad had bombed Germany during the war, but and other things. But I was always kind of interested in German culture. I knew we had some German ancestry. From Philadelphia, I think it was, right into Frankfurt, Germany. Then I get off in Germany, and I'm sitting in the airport waiting for they're going to send somebody to pick a bunch of us up and take us to a processing center, which was actually an old German barracks left over from probably World War I, and so the German boy in the airport there, and he's looking at me, he's looking at my medals and ribbons over my thing, and he's real curious about it, so I take them off and give them to him, which meant I didn't wear any of my Vietnam ribbons while I was in Germany. So it was never, the only way you could know I'd been to, because then I wore the Usador patch, the same one that Eisenhower wore during World War II, the Usador patch. But because I had been in a combat area, I wore 44th Medical Brigade, which is a very benign looking patch, but it's a Vietnam patch. In the Army, if you come from a combat zone, and you come into a new unit, you take on the new unit's patch, but because you were in a combat zone, you're privileged then to wear your prior unit's insignia if it was a combat zone. So I did, that gave it away, but I never wore any of my ribbons and anything. But they took us from the airport to process through this old German barracks. I was up on the second floor. It looks like there was at least 3 floors, a brick thing. And then they gave us a train voucher and put me on a train to Kaiserslautern, or Kaiserslautern as the guys always said it. And right at the west end of Kaiserslautern, there was a big military compound where all the GIs stayed and where the medical and dental facilities were, and that was called Vogelway. Vogel, of course, is German for bird. Vogelway. So I don't know exactly why they called it that. So, but now I'm assigned to a dental unit in Germany, in a place called Vogelway, outside of Kaiserslautern. And but again, when they described to me what I'm going to be doing, they've got a big dental lab going, but it's filled with Germans. The Germans are doing all the dental lab, making all the dentures, doing all that. There's no job for me.
Again.
I'm still out of a job. And so they make me a dental assistant. I assisted a captain, and this guy was so persnickety. I mean, fussy, fussy, fussy. Nobody else could work with him. So I'm the new guy who gave me to him. He was the Crown and Bridges, Captain McCarter.
Could have been a cousin of yours. We're descended
From
some
McCarters. I know that now. I've heard that now, but I wouldn't have known that at the time. He and I got along just fine. He could be kind of like, for instance, one day he says, "Specialist Wheeler, my 557 burr is too short." And I say to Captain McCarter, "Why, Captain McCarter, I just got that out of the storehouse." I said, "That's just the way they made this 557 burr." He says, "Well, go see if you can find me one that's a little longer," you know. But I kind of didn't let him walk on me. I just kind of kept him, and we got along just fine. And I think between him working and me helping him, we did a lot of quality work, you know. But down the hallway, working with Captain Daggett, who was a Texan, was my friend Steve Tomlin, who was a Texan, and they got along pretty good. He was the oral surgeon, and my friend Stephen Tomlin would tell me about some of the horror stories that happened in dental surgery, but we won't go into that. But when I first got to the unit, arrived at Vogelway, they took me to the barracks where we were supposed to be, upstairs in Vogelway, in this little barracks. It was about 3 blocks from the actual dental clinic. It wasn't too. It was downhill from us. You could walk down to it in the morning. So I get there. I get introduced to where my room's going to be in the barracks, and I look in the room, and there's one fellow who's across the room. He's sitting at like a piece of stereo equipment. He's got headphones on, you know, and I've got my cameras. I've got both my cameras on me. I had a couple of Pentaxes I picked up in Vietnam, and so I was carrying them like Colonel Brown, strapped one on either side of me. And I look at Steve Tomlin and I said, "Oh no, I got a barracks with a stereo net." He looks at me with the cameras off the side of my. Said, "Oh man, I got a barracks with a fag."
Oh.
funny stuff, you know.
Later to become best friends.
Well, here's what happened, and it was snowing. There was snow on the ground, slushy. It was real slushy snow out that day. And so anyway, I got to talking to the guy. Same day, wasn't in the barracks more than a couple hours, and and asked him what music he was listening to, and he was listening to either Jerry Jeff Walker or one of these other people, but folk people. And I said, "Oh, I like that kind of music too." And he says, "Oh, really?" And then I said, "Yeah, I've been playing guitar for years." And he said, "You play guitar?" And so he drags his custom-made Holt, Texas guitar out of his footlocker, and that's not right. That's not exactly right. He says, I've got a good guitar that I play, but I forgot to bring it up." He usually kept it in his locker. He had me walk with him down in the snow, down to the dental clinic where he had left his guitar, and then walk it back up to the barracks. And then he played a while and I played a while, and we were fast friends. That was it. He was from Dallas, Texas. He'd grown up kind of a rich kid, Dallas rich kid. His father was a businessman. They were used to living in very cultured circles and kind of Texas ersatz high society, you know how Texans are. They kind of ape culture a little bit, you know. My Texas friend understand that I love Texas. But anyway, you know, he grew up in an environment where, you know, they ate in fancy restaurants and they had servants bring around big stainless steel trays of biscuit warmers so you could, your hot biscuits, sir? You know, one of those numbers, you know. Very, very southern kind of attitude. But he was kind of getting fed up with Texas, and the worst part of it was at age 16, his father had died of a massive heart attack. Boom, his father's gone, 16. And he was really close to his father. He was not close to his mother ever. And so he kind of spun out a little bit. Eventually, he got in a car wreck, hit a bridge abutting it, and that's why his face was so disfigured. Was he'd had this real terrible accident, and so he decided he was going to go in the army. And somehow or another, he got into the dental care. It wasn't making dentures. He actually trained to be a regular dental assistant, a chairside dental assistant. So now I'm in Germany. The Germans are doing the dentures, and I'm now a dental assistant. So Steve had been there probably about 10 months or so. So first weekend, he took me into Kaiserslautern and showed me his favorite place to order a rump steak with kartoffels and salad, you know, and then he took me to his favorite place to kind of hang out, and he drink German beer, and at that point in time I had been drinking 3.2 beer in Vietnam mostly to stay hydrated. The water was, you know, brown, milky brown, and full of these tablets that they put into it, and so it seemed like the healthiest thing I could drink. Well, he buys a silver pills, he calls it. He buys me a German beer. We're sitting in this restaurant. It's his favorite Italian restaurant in Kaiserslautern, and they serve the best cannelloni. And frankly, I've never tasted better cannelloni in my life. And so he orders me one of these German beers. Just a bottle, just, you know, a typical bottle of German beer. And I drink it down pretty fast. And I'm sitting in the chair, and all of a sudden, I realize that I'm a little drunk.
It's 5%.
No, it's German export. It's between 8 and 11%.
Oh my goodness.
And so here I am in a restaurant, innocently drinking this thing, and I'm drunk on one bottle of German beer. You know, all my German relatives out there. You know, the boy comes home and falls off his chair, right? Not really. But no, I kind of staggered into the bathroom and washed my face and got kind of sobered up. But that was my introduction to Germany. But it was wintertime, snow on the ground. We rode a kind of one of these segmented bus that they kind of segment in the middle and what. And I didn't see one of those in the United States until years later, but they were very, very common in Germany at that time. The town had been part of old Barbarossa, the old German Empire that had been centered at Trier and whatnot. So lots of historic buildings around and cool things to see. Lots of bookstores and some music stores. The Framus guitars. I almost immediately bought myself a Framus guitar because I didn't have a guitar with me. So I would have a guitar to play along, and I kept that Framus till I left Germany, and I'm not sure if I brought it home or not. It wasn't a great guitar, but it's what I could afford, and so we played a lot of music together. We took trips together. Our first trip, we got on a train and left Kaiserslautern and went to Heidelberg, which is an old university town in Germany, and wonderful, wonderful old-fashioned atmosphere. A big Heidelberg castle up on the hill, which had been the center of the German apothecary industry back, even centuries ago, where almost all the medicines that were made in Central Europe actually came out of that huge Heidelberg pharmacy. and then eventually it was destroyed and somebody besieged it somewhere along the line, and it might have been during the 30 Years' War, and burned it down. So the basement still had an apothecary museum, but the rest of it was wonderful, wonderful brickwork with no roofs and no windows. Beautiful castle, but it had been pretty much destroyed. And then we took other excursions. I met another friend there. He was from Texas, actually, another Texan, and he had a Volkswagen, and he was about an E6 or so. He had some rank. I was an E4 coming out of Vietnam, but he decided he was going to take me to Paris. So we hopped in this little Volkswagen and we tootled all the way across to the German border. I remember stopping in Salzburg and having a really, really great French meal. I mean, provincial, well-cooked French meal right in front of the Salzburg Cathedral in this restaurant that had been there for hundreds of years. And then we tootled on across France, through Metz, through the battlefield at Verdun, which I had to see. So we stopped there and walked all around where you could walk. They still had areas of it where you weren't supposed to go. It was terrible, terrible battle there in the First World War, and debris everywhere still. The moonscape, just pit after pit after pit from all the shell hits, which had grown in with really scrubby, ugly bush. So it was, and they told us there at the museum that there had been so many people killed there that they figured the top 3 feet of topsoil was predominantly human. I mean, like 1 million people died over a period of time. It wasn't one battle. It was a huge, huge battle there. But
Trench warfare.
yeah, but coming into Verdun, the hills around were just covered with German cemeteries. And leaving Verdun, headed for Paris, the hills and areas were just covered with French cemeteries. Thousands upon thousands, rows and rows and rows. And I actually wrote a poem there after that. I was so impressed by the futility of it, you know, just the awfulness of it. That there was a theme on the, as you entered the Verdun, it said, "Nie wieder, pleasure may, never again." It was in 3 languages, and I named the poem that, you know, that never again should people do this to each other. You know. It was very moving. But we got into Paris and checked into a little. It was an attic room up in the Sorbonne district, the East Bank, you know, the student district, and proceeded to, I think that, well, I ended up going, in the service, I went to Paris 3 times, and then went back to Paris with Carolyn Dieter the 4th time, so I actually went to Paris 4 times in the course of being there. But, you know, I remember going to Napoleon's tomb, and to my joy, there was 2 German Panther tanks parked in front of the Museum of the Army. They weren't there when I went back with Carolyn Dieter. They'd moved them to the museum, but there was 2 honest-to-goodness German Panther tanks parked right in front of it. And, you know me, that was my favorite model in Germany, was the Panther tank, so I'd fallen into upon a jam on that one, you know. Funny stuff.
Panther and the Tiger were the 2.
Yeah.
Panther, you were always making models of this.
Well, the Panther was the one. The Tiger looked kind of blocky and ugly. The Panther looked sleek and kind of streamlined. But, you know, up the Eiffel Tower and you know, I went to the Louvre that first time. That was my first visit to the Louvre. Of course, Notre Dame and Sacré-Cœur, the other shop that's on the same island, the Ile-de-France, you know, with that lovely rose window that, you know, that everybody goes in there to see. We did as much of Paris as we could, you know, at that particular time. And then we had to be back. We were on a limited leave, and then we drove all the way back across France, all the way back into Germany, and so I was having a cool experience. The next time I took an experience, I went to Munich. And you know, it's funny. You always think of Germany, and maybe you think of Switzerland, you know, where happy peasants, they drink their milk, you know. You couldn't buy milk where I was at, normal milk like we have in the States. It was processed. It tasted sort of like milk. It was in these little triangular cartons, funny triangular cartons, and it was processed. it wasn't as bad as that milk in Japan, but it didn't taste like wholesome milk. When I got to the Munich train station on my first trip down there, and I did that alone. I don't think I went with Steve Tomlin on that. Got in the Munich train station, and right in the Munich train station, they were selling these half-liter tumblers of cow's milk right from the countryside for, it was 1 mark, which is then, it was four marks to $1, so it was 25 cents. And so later, of course, the American dollar got really devalued. But when I was there, it was like living in Japan as a kid, where you had 360 yen to $1, right? Well, here I am in Germany, four marks to $1. You could go right out in the town square where they sold the flowers, the typical bratwurst stand. You could buy a bratwurst, a big white sausage, a veal kind of sausage on a brötchen, a hard shell bun, slather it with German mustard for a mark, 25 cents. So after that, I hardly ever used the mess hall. In fact, I can only remember using the mess hall twice in Germany. I just ate off the German economy. The only time I ever went into the mess hall was I got kind of homesick for milk again. And they had these big vendors where they had whole milk and chocolate milk in mess halls. And I went in there and really made myself sick drinking chocolate milk. But other than that, I bought all my clothes on the German economy. I didn't bother to go to the PX and buy what all the typical American clothing or the GI would buy. And so it got to where, and Steve was the same way. He was small, so to get clothes that really fit him, he went to the child's section in all the department store, and he bought his clothes. And so when we were out and about in various German towns and whatnot, we were dressed like Germans. We didn't look like Americans. In fact, I remember one time in Weierhof where a couple of drunk GIs are coming down the sidewalk, get off the street, Krauts, the 4th Division is coming through. Typical American GIs, arrogant GIs. But, and he liked to collect old art, ancient art, and so he bought a lot of art. Later opened an arts gallery in Santa Monica and sold California art, famous California artists and stuff. He's passed away. He's been gone since 2018, I think now.
I remember when he passed.
Yeah. But he was, we just were, pals, he got me started, and we did lots of train rides. I remember going out to Metz. I remember going out to the, numerous towns. I went to so many German towns and villages. My friend with the Volkswagen, he discovered right on the Rhine, way up in the hills, a town called Alt-Leiningen, and way off the tourist track. But Alt-Leiningen had the original city wall all the way around it, all the way around it. All the houses were medieval. They didn't have glass in the windows in the lower stores. They had iron bars, bent iron bars, so to keep people from breaking in where they kept the animals. They kept the animals down below, and the people lived above in the medieval things. And that became one of our places to go, is off to this obscure little, and I mean, if you had seen a knight riding down the street with his lance across his saddle, it wouldn't have been out of place. It was just a perfectly preserved medieval little town up in the hills. So saw a lot of neat stuff. I remember going along the Rhine River and eating in the guest houses, and again some Rumpsteak and Pommes frites, Wiener Schnitzel. They take the veal cutlets and they pound them with hammers. They get those things so far out that when they brought it to you on a plate, it was hanging over the edges of the plate. And then you'd order pommes frites, and they'd bring you a big oval dish, typically, heaped with enough pommes frites for 4 people. And then I discovered Johannisberry, which is Johannisberry, which is the same as Johannisberry. What is it? It's a what do they call it in this country? But it wasn't an alcoholic beverage. It was a pure fruit juice. And you ordered it in a little half-liter bottle. Black currant. Fresh. It was black currant, and it was so delicious. Black currant juice, and pay a mark for it. 25 cents for a bottle. beautiful, you know. And so for me, you know, I was eating on the German economy and liking it. When I left Vietnam, I was 178 pounds. When I left Germany, I was 233. I mean, that tells you how much weight I put on. When I came home from Germany, I was pretty chunky. I put on quite a bit of weight. And the French cooking, and you know, was wonderful. Steve and I decided we were going to go down to Italy, and we heard that you could get a military flight to go to Italy. You know, just show up at Rhine-Main airfield, and if they had space available, they'd pop you. And so we ended up, I thought we'd end up going in a big jet. We went in a private jet with a general. And they landed us over in an air base called Aviano, Italy. And we just took off from there. We'd get on trains, we'd get on buses. I can remember going, we went to Florence, we went to, at that trip there, we went to Venice. I remember I stayed in Mestre, although I remember the mosquitoes in Mestre were awful because of the swamps. Then we went down to Rimini, where during World War II, the British had, in fighting against the Germans, the British had come up on the east side of the mountain range. It's the center of Italy, and the Americans had come up on the west side. And so the British sort of had staked out Aviano had been a lovely Italian resort spot. And the Europeans liked to go to, most Americans didn't know it existed, but it was just big, big, broad beaches, and on all the street corners they sold, you had these Italian ice vendors with all the different flavored Italian ices, and you know, as much as you could possibly eat. The food was good, and the beaches were just crowded with, the Scandinavians knew about Rimini, and so the Scandinavians would come down, and so you'd have all these pretty blonde Scandinavian girls down there who didn't understand what out in the sun all day means.
Oh.
And so they'd go out, they'd come down from Sweden, go out on the beaches, you know, lay in the beach all day, and then you'd see these sullen, burnt to a crisp Scandinavian girls roaming, you know, in the afternoons. You could see they were just in terrible misery. They'd burn themselves to a crisp. But we stayed there, and there was dance halls and parties going on, and so we had a grand old time. But then the news came on that the Russians had invaded Czechoslovakia. It was in Russia. That's 68, I guess,
67.
67, 68, right about that time. And the call went out that all Americans were to return to their units in Germany. We were all put on red alert.
68, I think is right. 54 is Hungary and 68 is Czech.
Yeah, I know, yeah, Hungary, but. So here we are. We've got to get back to our unit in Germany as fast as we can, because we were mobilized, all on red alert. We were all set to go, ready to fight a war. I mean, totally mobilized. And so we couldn't get a fast way back from Rimini, because we'd gotten kind of off the beaten track, ride a bus from here to there, here to there. But there was an Italian army truck that we had to talking to the guys, and we negotiated that they would give us a ride in their army truck, because they were eventually bound for Aviano, which was inland, quite a long ways. But we didn't figure on the Italian way of getting from one place to another. We'd go through one little village. I remember going over a British Army Bailey Bridge of the type of World War II, and this one, it had been there since World War II. The Italians never bothered to rebuild the bridge. They just used this steel frame. I remember going across that. But every time we'd hit a small town, the guys had to stop. They had to go in and they had to drink. They had to, you know, paisano, you know, this kind of stuff. And so we stopped, and we stopped, and we stopped, and Steve and I looked at it and said, well, we're doing the right thing. We're trying to get back to our unit, but would it be the end of the world if the war was over before we got back there? You know, we were thinking semi-unpatriotic thoughts, but we kept going, And when we got back to Aviano, got on the base, it was announced that the red alert was off, and we didn't have to return to our units. And so we went north from there. We went to where the Last Supper is displayed in the
Milano.
Milano.
Milano there,
Yeah.
Milan here.
Yeah, so we went up to Milano, and then we went over to Verona. It's used in Shakespeare. Romeo and Juliet is the setting, and there it's a total tourist trap. They designated a balcony as the balcony, which is sort of like Jerusalem. There's
Like
nobody-
5 ascensions.
Right, but yeah, they even had a bratwurst stand for the German tourist. Funny, but they had the most intact Colosseum I'd ever seen. When you go to Rome, you can look down and see the floor where the catacombs are, and they kept the animals and the gladiators and all that stuff. And the upper walls, some are intact, some are fallen down. This one in Aviano was intact. It was complete all the way around the framework, and the floor was this beautiful domed wooden floor over catacombs.
Yeah, which is what you would have seen anciently.
It was
in
No, it was
Rome.
perfectly intact. It was a complete, perfectly intact Roman Colosseum. And they had stage props out on the wood floor. I guess that they would do plays, and that was where the local population went for plays and different things like that. It was interesting. And we also discovered something that was very useful. If you want to eat in Italy, don't go to an Italian restaurant. Go to a department store.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because in Italy, you have all of the farmers out in the outlying areas, and the women come in to shop, and they bring their baskets on their arm, and they shop, and when they're done shopping, they go to the top floor in the department stores. All the department stores had a restaurant on the top floor, and all the local goodies, that were popular in that region, were cooked to perfection, because these Italian farm women wouldn't settle for anything less than really good food. And so you could, in any town, you could go to the top of a department store and eat all the local cuisine cooked to perfection, to the satisfaction of an Italian farm woman, and for pennies, cheap as dirt. And so that's how we ate. We ate in the department stores in the little Italian villages and stuff we're not through. So that was one of my kind of great get-around discoveries. And of course, when you're in Switzerland, but I didn't do Switzerland until later with Carol. When I went back with Carolyn Dieter, I flew over Switzerland to get to Italy in that particular trip. So we had a grand old time, and then Steve and I got separated. He was still there at Kaiserslautern, but they had I was the first Vietnam veteran that had come into that unit. This is during the war, and so I was their very first Vietnam veteran. They marched me in for pay call and handed me E5 stripes without even testing me or anything. I was the first guy in the unit. They come in from a combat zone, and they had some E5 stripes to give, and they gave them to me. So suddenly I'm a Sergeant E5, and my pay scale goes up. Well, then that's when I kind of just started discovering antique stores and stuff, and I made friends with a clockmaker, Robert Jaworski. He was and he was still a young man. I mean, he was in his 40s, and that's a young man by my scale, my way of thinking. But he had fought in the Waffen SS on the Russian front, and he had actually been wounded and pulled out of his tank, and the Russians had captured him. Actually, he was on the ground and being guarded with a bunch of other prisoners out in the open. And when nightfall came, he rolled off his stretcher and crawled back to his lines. So he survived all that. But he was just the gentlest soul. He had a clock store. He restored old grandfather clocks. And he had a little bookstore on the side. Well, a lot of times when you restore old clocks, you had these really elaborate curlicues and faces and stuff. And if you had an old clock where part of the design was knocked off, that was hard stuff to duplicate. But I said, Robert, you know, in the where the German Dental Lab guys work, they've got agar agar and they've got molding stuff. I said, I'm sure Herr Malicious, which is I knew one of the dental lab techs. He actually took me to his home. We got to be pretty good friends. I can mold if you take this design off this side, give it to me. I can mold it if it's not a reverse image, and so I started on the side. I was making replacement decorations for his clocks and stuff. And so he loaded me in his Volkswagen, and we went looking. He had a place way up the road between. It was between Undenheim and Schornheim.
I know those places.
But I didn't know it at the time. There was an old man up there that had a barn, and I don't know when he accumulated all these things, but he had stacks of grandfather clocks, which maybe he had bought off after the war. After the war, maybe they had come out of, who knows, Jewish homes. I don't know where they got these things, but they were stacked like cordwood in this barn. There was a layer of clocks on wooden stickers, with another layer of wooden stickers, another layer of clocks. Hundreds of these wooden clocks in this barn up there, right where Schornheim are. I wish I had known that we had relatives there at that time. I was right there. But anyway, we go up there and I'd help him load the clocks he wanted to restore, and then we'd tootle on down in his Volkswagen bus back to his shop, and I had a lot of fun with that, you know, and got to help him a little bit with the clocks and stuff, understanding the clock works. When I left, he knew I was going. He reached under the seat because he knew I wanted military stuff, and he pulls out his poncho from World War II and hands it to him as a gift. He remember me. He gave me his World War II poncho, camouflage poncho. So it was, and then I learned to go down to Munich on the train where I was buying German helmets, original paint, original decals, original leather linings for 40 marks a piece, $10 a piece. The same helmets are going $1,800 to $2,500 right now in the market as I watch it. Some of those helmets I brought home, yeah, that's how much. But I was buying $10 a piece in Munich, so I had a lot of fun.
I know.
Okay.
But there came a time when they got the first dentist in from Vietnam, an officer, an actual dentist, and so they paired me up with him and put us in what they called a mobile KJ unit. I had been in KJ units in Vietnam, and they had created a mobile dental unit, KJ unit, of the same basic description out in the hills in a place called Weierhof, that had there been a war with the Russians, we would have been a mobile unit and would have followed, it was an artillery battery, actually rockets, it was a rocket battery up on the hill. And so they moved us out to a place called Weierhof and put us into a KJ unit. So that separated me from Steve Tomlin. We did occasionally visit, but later, after I got out of the Army, Steve didn't want to settle in Texas and came out to California, but that's another story. So I spent a period of time in that unit, but what was really nice about that unit, the doctor was Jewish, Captain Eleni, and his wife was a Jewish Parisian. She was a Parisian, and he hated the Army, and so he was never one for being a stickler. He was the officer in charge. During the week, we put on hospital whites. Never wore a uniform through the whole week. Hospital whites, and the only time that I had to put on a uniform was when I had to get paid. You had to go into Kaiserslautern to draw your pay, and you're supposed to get your money. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, and all that stuff. And they give you your shekels. Go back home, stash your uniform, never see it again until next payday, and just wear hospital whites. And when you're off duty, civilian clothes. And Dr. Eleni, I'd say, well, I want to go to Paris, or I want to go to Munich. You know, okay, write me a pass. We would wrap up the clinic about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday for the dependent wives and kids of the artillery battery. And I'd get on the local train, go to the closest train station, and I'd be off to Amsterdam, I'd be off to wherever. And so I just popped in and out of all sorts of I wanted to see Europe. A lot of the other GIs, they want to sit in the barracks and drink, you know, or play cards, or, you know, oh, I can't wait till I get back to the States, you know. But no, I wanted to see Europe, and I was taking every opportunity I could get, you know. But it got me in a bit of a pickle because I arrived in Paris on May 9th, and the May Revolution started in Paris May 10th. And I got right smack in the middle of it, and I couldn't get out for a day or so. It took me a little while to extract myself. The kids were in the streets, De Gaulle, Assassin, Fascist, Figaro, and the communist unions were out there seating the whole thing, and the Parisian police and everything else. You couldn't get around, and so I ended up out in the streets. I couldn't even get back to my hotel for a while, and I'm on the street, and this French girl runs by me, and she says something, and I guess she realizes I'm a foreigner. I'm not a French. I'm dressed like a German, really. And she hollers something to me in French, and I said, "Pardon, je ne parle pas français. Je suis American." Get off the sidewalks. They're arresting all the foreigners. I think she thought I was a German, because Rudi Duschke, who's a radical in Germany, was purported to be coming from Germany to join the radical revolution in the streets of Paris. And so she was warning me to get off the streets. And so I kind of tried make myself low, but it was hard because the police would push the students down the streets, and they'd get to the next intersection, and they'd go this way, go down the adjacent streets, get behind the police. The police would panic and push back the other way, and it was like a giant tug-of-war in the streets. And they dug up the cobblestones, and they'd throw them at the cops. I watched one hit a policeman, watched him go down. I said, "Oh man, this is getting out of hand," you know. And I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't extract myself. But finally, I got the things moved around. I got close to my hotel. I went upstairs, stayed there. The tear gas was so thick. In fact, that one picture of the Frenchman, he's holding his nose here in my book. That's from tear gas during the May Revolution. But eventually, the trash collectors and the communist unions and all these people threw in with the students, and nobody was taking out the trash. That's after I left. What happened? So the second day, I was pretty much up in the hotel room. I was living on lemonade and strawberries and French bread to get by, because everything was kind of boarded up. I kind of peeked out at midnight because it was kind of quiet, and I saw that the street was empty in the direction of the metro. They'd locked the metro to keep the kids in the neighborhood. So I packed up my stuff real quick, ran from the metro. It was open. I got to the Gare du Nord, Station North, and eventually got back to Germany. But that was the revolution that toppled the Gaulle government. It was the May Revolution. But I got back there, and of course, I'm so tired. I'm worn out. And Dr. Eleni, his wife's friend, she's a Parisian. She's got to know every detail. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. And I'm just, let me go to my bed, because I've been out in the streets, and all that stuff, and I hadn't gotten enough sleep. So finally, when she'd bled me dry of as much information as she could get out of me, I went to bed, and that was the end of my experience with the May 10th revolution in the streets of Paris. So anyway, I mentioned that I got back from Paris just dog-tired and had to go through the Inquisition from Captain Eleni's wife, but that was all pretty much settled. Traveled some more, went to Amsterdam several times. Got to the Channel to cross. I wanted to go to the British Isles, and I was traveling with Steve Tomlin. He didn't want to go to England. He wanted to go to Amsterdam, and I acquiesced to him. So I never got to the British Isles. Never got over there. I got all over the continent you could. In those days, of course, it was the Iron Curtain, so I didn't get into Eastern Europe. And I always wanted to go to Budapest and some of the other older cities, but I never got over there. There came a time when it was time for me to go home. I had gone into the Army on January 3rd, 1966, and technically I guess they could have kept me till January 3rd, 1969, but they actually released me and let me go home on December 14th. I think that was the day.
A speck of mercy.
A speck of mercy. They did that often too. That was not an unusual thing for them to do. And so I got to get home in time for Christmas. I had considered going to actually staying in Europe and maybe working in Berlin. They would have set me up with a job, would have set me up with a house and the whole thing. And by that point, my German was getting pretty good. I remember up in Kirchheim-Belanden, which was the town closest to Weierhof, where I was with that mobile KJ team that was attached to the artillery battery. But I was at the train station in Kirchheim-Belanden, and as is very customary in traditional Europe, if an elderly lady asks you, will you please escort me, that you offer your arm and you escort her where she wants to go. And so anyway, this sweet lady gets off the train and asks me to escort her to the town center, and I take her arm and I walk her, and we're talking about this, that, and the other. When I got there, she said, "You got a very peculiar accent. Is that the local accent for this part of Germany?" I said, "No, actually, I'm an American soldier." She wasn't shocked. She said, "Oh my, it's one of those kind of things." So my German had gotten that good that she, other than detect an accent which she wasn't even sure was anything but just a local dialect, and so the time came to come home, and after this offer for Berlin, I finally said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so the plane is, they fly us, and it was a mild day in Germany. It was a very mild weather day, and I had worn a hole in the bottom. There's a hole in my sock. I had worn a hole in the bottom of my low quarter shoes, my dress shoes. But I thought, I'm not going to buy a whole brand new set of Army shoes just to use them one time to get home. And so I decided to just go ahead and wear it with the hole in my shoe. Well, we come into Fort Dix, New Jersey, and it's blizzard. It's snow and the wind's blowing, and it hadn't been that blizzardy in Europe the whole time it was there. It was mostly pretty mild in Europe compared to something like that. And so they're standing us out in formation, and my shoes in the snow, and I'm freezing. I'm sitting there just saying, well, that's what I get for Chinson on buying a new pair of shoes, But I went ahead and flew on home. They shipped my duffel bag. Actually, I didn't get to carry it home, like the old duffel bag dragged. They shipped it home for me. And I got on the plane, flying into L.A., and we're coming down through the cloud layers, right into the thickest, ugliest smog bank you ever saw. And I'm looking out the window, and I'm saying, did I make a mistake? Should I have stayed in Europe? So pretty soon I'm home. And it wasn't long before, even though I had broken off the engagement with Carolyn Dieter in Europe at a prior time, not sure, but we were quite ready to go ahead at that point. As soon as I saw her, it was all over. She was so true, such a loyal person, and she'd written me faithfully all the time through Vietnam, and written me so faithfully in Germany, and this, that, and the other. And so, even though I was having some physical problems at that point. I had the onset of ulcerative colitis, and I was starting to experience cramps. And as I'm home, it got worse, and really morphed into flu. Okay, so I was pretty sick when I came out of the Army, it actually, had it been fair, now when soldiers are sick in the Army today, they won't actually discharge them until they put them in some kind of shape. There was a lot of political hullabaloo about that, letting guys go sick, and so the Army has gotten very careful now about if someone's got an obvious problem, they try to cure them before they let them go. But in those days, if they could slip you out the door without doing anything, they did it. And so I came home sick. But graciously, the place that I'd worked for before, which was Gordon Ayres Camera Shop, my immediate boss, Ed Teal, offered me a job, and he wanted me to stay with him for a year, and I think he wanted to train me up into to something else. But the job that I got was running the rental and repair department, so I had to deal with all the complaints on the repairs and stuff, and which the way I was feeling, that wasn't so much fun. as it turned out, I got gradually sicker, and I had to apologize, but I had to excuse myself from the job because had gotten too sick to do it. But Carolyn Dieter and I were married. We're married March, what was it, March 20,
It was March 29th,
29th.
1968, in the
Yeah,
Lutheran Church in Pomona.
yeah, the Lutheran Church. That was the church that she had grown up with. They were a Missouri Synod Lutheran. I guess there's various denominations of Lutherans. The most common is the American Lutheran Church, but she had grown up in the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church kind of thing. So we were married there, and she had finished her schooling as a nurse, a registered nurse, and she had gone to San Diego State and whatnot, and so she got a job at Casa Colina over in Pomona, and I was working in the camera shop, and things were going along, but I was beginning to spend time with the doctors, and it came a point where they told me that they would have to take out my colon, and I'd probably wear a bag on the side of my hip at the time, and it was very distressful, and Carolyn, as a nurse, knew what that meant. She knew I was in trouble.
Yeah, colostomy.
Yeah, colostomy, you got it. That's the word. So anyway, we limped along for a while. Eventually, she got pregnant. That's where Dana comes in, and Dana was born in 1973, as I recall, July 29th is what I remember just off the top of my head. Carolyn Dieter herself was born on July 24th, and for LDS folks, that's Pioneer Day, so it was always easy